A man's hand closes around a waitress's wrist, not a single drop of wine spilled. Wide Las Vegas at night, a false sunrise thrown backward into the sky. The light crawls us the windows of a restaurant where every tablecloth costs more than the rent of the woman carrying it. Medium table 9, 4 men. The silverware goes quiet as if the whole room stopped breathing at once. Close, the face of a 26-year-old, not afraid, not angry. Only the patience of someone who already knows every move left on the board. The hand comes off her wrist by itself. He doesn't know why. Outside, 3 blocks down, a dark blue sedan sits at the curb, engine running. Nobody gets out. She unties her apron, walks out the serve exit, straight into the sightline of 2 pairs of eyes in the dark. The courtroom smelled like old wood and newer lies. Cassie Malone sat in the witness box and did not fidget. Not once. That was the first thing people noticed. Not her face, though her face was the kind of face that made people look twice in grocery stores and then feel embarrassed about themselves for doing it. Not her hands, though her hands were folded on the railing with a stillness that didn't belong on someone 26 years old, sitting in a federal courtroom with 3 defense attorneys staring at her, like she was a problem they hadn't quite solved. It was the stillness, the absolute unnerving. Nobody home, but everything's on stillness. The kind that takes years to build, the kind that isn't peace. The kind that looks like peace from a distance, the way a frozen lake looks safe until you're standing on it, and you hear the sound underneath your feet and you realize the sound is the ice deciding whether or not to hold you. The prosecuting attorney stood at her table, straightened a sheet of paper that didn't need straightening, because that's what people do when they're waiting for something they've waited 4 years for, and they don't quite trust that it's actually happening. Miss Malone. Yes. Can you describe in your own words what happened on the night of October 3rd? Cassie looked at the jury. 12 people. 9 of them over 50. 5 of them already leaning forward. The lean of people who sense they are about to hear something that matters, something real. The kind of lean that jurors don't know they're doing until the moment afterward, when they realize they've been holding their breath. She did not look at the defendant's table. She didn't need to. I was carrying their drinks, she said. And then I wasn't. 10 months before that courtroom, Cassie Malone was invisible. That was the plan. She'd built the invisibility the way you build anything that has to hold weight. Carefully, slowly. One shift at a time, in a restaurant where the tablecloths cost more than her monthly rent. And the men at those tables had long ago stopped seeing the people who brought their food, which was exactly what she needed. La Stella occupied the eastern wing of the Palazzo Sereno resort on the Las Vegas Strip. 202 linen on every table. A wine list, 47 pages long. A sommelier named Gerald who wore the same expression every single day regardless of what was happening around him. The expression of a man who has achieved a kind of professional enlightenment that the rest of the world cannot access. He'd told Cassie once that the cellar held bottles worth more than some cars. She'd nodded, written down an order, said nothing. That was her talent. Not Taekwondo. Though she was extraordinary at that. Medals in a box under her bed she hadn't opened in 4. Not the intelligence, which was considerable, or the patience, which was the kind that most people never develop, because most people never need it that badly. Her talent was this: she had learned to disappear while standing in a room. The uniform helped. White button-down. Black apron. The costume of 1,000 restaurants in 1,000 cities, designed to say exactly one thing: I am here to serve you and you do not need to remember me. Cassie wore it like armor. She moved through the dining room with the precision of someone who had memorized every inch of the space in the first 2 weeks. The 3-degree slope near table 7. The draft from the south wall ventilation that needed candle attention on tables 12 through 15. The 7 steps between the kitchen pass and the VIP section where the carpet changed and you had to adjust your stride or you'd look uncertain. Cassie never looked uncertain. She'd learned that from Danny Malone. Her father. Cass, you know what makes a good detective? He'd said it in the car, driving home from a tournament, not looking at her, eyes on the road. The way he delivered the lessons that mattered most. Same thing that makes a good janitor, or a good waitress, or anybody who works in a room full of people who think they matter more than they do. She'd waited. Nobody looks at the furniture, he said. She hadn't understood it then. 13 years old, still buzzing from winning, still in that particular vibration of a body that has just done exactly what it was trained to do. She understood it now. 14 months. That was how long she'd been furniture at La Stella. In that time she had learned that Vincent Cataneo ate dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays without exception. Table 4, not the best table. Table 4 had a sightline issue with the kitchen door, but it had been his father's table, and Vincent Cataneo was a man whose relationship with the past was not negotiable. He ordered the same things. Branzino Tuesdays. Veal Thursdays. The same Barolo. The same sparkling water. Olives that arrived before he sat because the kitchen started them when the valet spotted his car. In that time she had learned that the private dining room, the reserve, was used twice a month for meetings that were not dinners. Kitchen staff reduced. Regular servers replaced by 2 men in suits who were not, by any reasonable measure, servers. Meetings lasting 90 minutes to 3 hours. Whoever emerged afterward drank more than they had going in. She had always found that interesting. She had learned that Joseph Barone, introduced to new staff as a close friend of the Cataneo family, came in once a week, always alone. Always the bar, never a table. Always tipped in cash with the quiet precision of someone who's been doing it for 4 decades and wants no record of having done so. She had learned that La Stella's monthly food and beverage revenue, as reported to the Nevada Gaming Commission, ran approximately 30% higher than the restaurant could possibly generate given its seating, and any reasonable estimate of per-cover spend. 30% every month. Money coming in that didn't correspond to anything being served. Danny's voice in her head: people lie. Numbers don't lie, numbers just sit there being wrong until somebody notices. She had noticed, she had said nothing, and she had waited. The night everything cracked open, she almost missed her shift. This is the kind of detail that doesn't survive into official versions. The version where everything happens with clean causality. A led to B led to C, purpose and consequence neatly arranged for the people who weren't there. The truth is that on September 19th, Cassie Malone almost called in sick because she had a headache that had been sitting behind her left eye since 2 in the afternoon, and she was tired in a way that felt different from normal tired. Hollower. The tiredness of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time. 4 years is a long time. She almost called in. She got dressed instead. Black slacks, white button-down, black apron. She drove to the Strip in her 2019 Civic. Bought used, paid cash, registered Nevada. Nothing about it that would make anyone look twice. Parked 3 blocks out. Walked through September heat that hadn't gotten the message that the sun had gone down an hour ago. Clocked in at 5:48 p.m. Did not know that the next 4 hours would split the 4 years she'd spent building directly down the middle. Went to her section, started setting tables. Dario Cataneo arrived at 7:43. She knew the time because she'd just finished resetting table 11 after a party of 6 had left what the busboy described, under his breath, as a crime scene, and she'd noted the time from habit. Danny's voice again. Note the time. Always note the time. Time is the one thing nobody can fake after the fact. 7:43. She felt him before she saw him. Not him specifically. The particular shift in a room's atmosphere that happens when someone enters who expects to respond to their arrival. The way sound adjusts. The way other people orient without knowing they're orienting. The unconscious recollocation of bodies in proximity to a certain kind of confidence. She turned, still carrying her tray. 4 men, the 3 behind him existed to fill space around the one in front. Large, quiet, arranged like parentheses around a statement. The statement was Dario Cataneo, 33 years old, dark hair. A jaw his grandfather had probably considered distinguished that on Dario read more as stubborn. Wearing a jacket that cost more than Cassie's monthly car payment, and wearing it the way people wear expensive things when they've never had to worry about them. Carelessly. Like it didn't matter. Because for him, nothing really needed to matter. The family name had already done the work of mattering. He was also already drunk, not falling down drunk. The drunk that sits right at the edge of confident and shows in small adjustments wider stance. Half-second delay before the eyes focus. The voice when he spoke to the host carrying that fractional extra someone absolutely certain they're being perfectly reasonable. Cataneo. As if that were sufficient. At La Stella it was. The host smiled and said of course and led them to table 9. Not table 4. Table 4 was for Vincent, and even Dario apparently understood that. Table 9 was in the VIP section, back to the wall, clear sightline to the room. Old habits, even drunk. Cassie watched 1 second longer than she should have. Then went back to her section. 20 minutes later Philip appeared at her elbow. Philip, the floor manager, whose entire personality had been compressed by 15 years of hospitality management, into something technically human that radiated an almost aggressive professionalism. Table 9, she looked at him, their server called out. You're taking it, that's not my section. It is tonight. She could have argued, she didn't. She picked up her notepad and walked to table 9, and she stood at the edge of it and she said, Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with some water? None of them looked at her. Which was normal, which was fine. Which was exactly right. Dario was talking to the man on his left about money and about someone who hadn't delivered what they'd promised and what the appropriate response to that failure should be. The bodyguard-adjacent men were doing the thing bodyguard-adjacent men do in restaurants. The habitual visual sweep of a room that had become so automatic they probably did it in their sleep. Water would be great, one of them said. The only one who acknowledged she'd spoken. Still or sparkling? Still, she wrote it down. Took the rest of the order. Gone from their awareness before it finished turning away. Furniture. Good. The first hour was unremarkable. Food ordered. Wine ordered. The Barolo Riserva, $340. Ordered the way you order something when you've never needed to know what things cost. She brought it. Opened it tableside with the small ceremony the restaurant expected. Poured a taste for Dario, who swirled it once barely, nodded without smelling it. She stepped back, became furniture again, and she listened. Not obviously. Not in any way that would register as listening to someone watching. She had learned from Danny, who had learned from 20 years of detective work, how to be present in a conversation without appearing present in it. The angle of the body. The task performed nearby. The attention going soft and peripheral, seeing the room from the corner of her eye rather than looking directly, which paradoxically lets you hear more clearly. She heard fragments. 2 names she recognized from a reference to something in 3 days involving a number. Something about a man called the Englishman that made Dario laugh in a way that didn't contain much humor. Fragments. But fragments were what she'd been collecting for 14 months. Fragments assembling into a picture that was, she was beginning to believe, almost complete. Almost Bistesca cleared. Dessert declined, second bottle open. A Super Tuscan at $460 because apparently the evening had not yet concluded. Cassie came to refill Dario's glass. She leaned in. The movement you make when you reach across a table. Precisest. Weight shifted, wrist turned just so. The wine going exactly where she intended, and then Dario's hand was on her wrist. Not the glass, not the bottle, her wrist. He didn't grab. That was the thing. Grabbing would have been hostile, and hostility has a clear response. He placed his hand with a kind of casual proprietary ease that was somehow worse than grabbing. Like he was resting it on a railing. Like she was the railing. Stay a while. Not looking at her. Still looking at the man across from him. Finishing what her point he'd been making. I like the view. The table went quiet. Not silent, just quieter. The small recalibration of men watching to see what happens next. Cassie did not pour the wine, she did not pull her arm away, she did not smile. She looked down at his hand on her wrist. The way you look at an object that has appeared where it shouldn't be. Curious. Assessing, without urgency. Then she looked up at his face. And this is the moment that people at nearby tables tried to describe later. To friends, to spouses, over their own dinner tables. This look this waitress gave this man. They struggled with the words because the look didn't fit categories. Not fear. Not the careful blankness women sometimes wear in these situations. That protective neutrality of someone calculating options. It was something else entirely. The look of someone who has complete and total information about the situation they are in. Every variable accounted for. Every outcome already mapped. Every possible next move already filed under the appropriate tab. Patient, absolutely, entirely. To felt it. He felt it the way you feel a temperature change. Not consciously. In the body first, the slight involuntary shift. The micro-adjustment the nervous system makes when it registers something the brain hasn't caught up to yet. His hand came off her wrist. He didn't know why. He recovered quickly, reached for his wine glass with the same hand. Pretended the whole thing had been a casual gesture. Misread. Smiled at the man across from him to re-establish the conversational thread. I'll get you anything else you need, Cassie said. Voice completely level. She walked back toward the kitchen. She did not go to the bathroom and shake. She did not lean against the wall and breathe through it. These are the things that happen in movies. Through the exhale. The hand pressed against the sternum. Cassie went to the kitchen and told the expeditor table 9 was ready with a thick and picked up 2 plates for table 14 and delivered them with a smile and answered a question about the risotto and was completely fine. Fine that. More than the Taekwondo, more than the 4 years of building, more than anything else. This was the thing that set her apart. 4 years ago she had stood in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning, while a detective she'd never met told her that her father was dead. And she had made a decision in that corridor about who she was going to be on the other side of it. Not about grief. Not about anger. though the anger had been massive and had since been compressed into something dense and small and completely under control, a fuel rather than a fire. A decision about who she was, and she had been that person every day since, even tonight. Especially tonight. She was clearing glassware from a nearby station when she noticed Joseph Barone. Third stool from the end of the bar. Facing the dining room rather than the bottles. Glass of something amber in front of him, untouched since she'd last looked. 65 years old and built like a man who had once been larger and had compressed himself over time into something economical. Silver hair. Close cropped. A face that had learned to show nothing and had gotten very good at the lesson. He was watching table 9. Not the casual awareness of someone in proximity. He was watching it the way Cassie watched rooms. With specificity, with purpose, he had been watching when Dario's hand went to her wrist. He was still watching now. She filed at the part of her mind that was always filing, always sorting, always adding to the picture. Joseph Barone. 65, underboss of the Cataneo organization. A man who had served Vincent Cataneo for over 3 decades, with a loyalty that was either admirable or terrifying depending on which side of it you were standing. A man who had, according to Tony Fig, objected. When it happened, when the decision about Danny Malone was made, Tony had told her carefully, reluctantly, the words costing him something. Barone was in the room. Barone said it was wrong, Barone was overruled. And Barone had said nothing after that. She watched him watching. What does Dario look like to him, she thought. That drunk, careless, entitled young man carrying the last name like a trophy he found rather than earned. Does he see what's coming? Does he know someone is already here? She did not look back when she took the glassware to the station. The shift ended at 11:15. She changed in the staff locker room. Jeans and a gray pullover, for translation taking less than 4 minutes because she'd gotten efficient at it. Signed out. Said goodnight to Ernesto, the prep cook. A quiet man who had once shown her photographs of his daughter's quinceañera on his phone, and whose daughter had looked exactly as beautiful as the photographs suggested. She walked out through the service. The city, loud and bright and completely unconcerned with the weight of any specific human life moving through it. Las Vegas at 11 p.m. was still a full-volume event. The Strip throwing light into the sky like a false sunrise in the wrong direction. She walked toward the parking garage. 3 blocks from the resort she noticed the car. Dark blue sedan. Idling at the curb, engine running. No reason to idle at a curb with the engine running unless you were waiting for something. Danny's voice, a running engine is a question. What are they waiting for? She kept walking. Didn't slow down. Didn't look directly. Noted the plate. Nevada, not a rental prefix. Noted the angle. The car was facing the direction she was walking from, which meant if it was watching her it had positioned itself to follow. She turned left at the next corner. Away from her parking garage. Half a block down she ducked into boutique and counted 1, 2, 3. The dark blue sedan turned the corner. Didn't stop, drove past. Slowly. The kind of slowly that isn't casual. 2 occupants. Couldn't make out faces. She waited. Took a longer route to the garage. Watched mirrors and windows and the moving person throws when they're trying not to move obviously. Saw no one. Got to her car, locked herself in. Her heart rate was elevated, not dramatically, the recalibration of a body that has detected a shift in variables. She opened the secure messaging app she shared only with Dex Warren. Set to auto-delete every 24 hours. Blue sedan. Nevada plates. 2 occupants surveilling after my shift. 30 seconds license plate, she typed it. 30 more seconds registered to a Shell's company. Give me 10 minutes. She sat in the dark of the garage, breathed. Thought about her father the way she always thought about him at moments like this. Not grief exactly, not anymore. More like checking in, reporting. I'm here, Dad, still here. Getting closer. 8 minutes later Dex responded. Shell company traces back to a holding company that traces back to another holding company. Different architecture from Cataneo's setup. This isn't them. She stared at the message. Who's still working? But Cass, if it's not Cataneo, you need to know that tonight. She started the car. Drove home through the bright, unreasonable city, and thought about parallel lines and what happens when they converge. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom on the east side of the city, in a neighborhood the real estate listings called up and coming, and the people who actually lived there called fine. It's fine. We have a good Mexican place on the corner. $840 a month, leaving enough from La Stella wages to live without touching the savings she'd been building for 4 years. Savings not for emergencies, for a specific defined purpose. She had chosen this apartment for modesty, for 2 exits, for the view of the parking lot from the 3rd-floor kitchen window where she could see what was below without being visible herself. These were not normal things to consider when renting an apartment. She'd stopped being normal at 2 in the morning in a hospital corridor 4 years ago. She unlocked the door, locked it behind her. Did the walkthrough. 3 minutes every room. Danny, a walkthrough isn't fear. It's information. You want to know what your space looks like before you relax in it. Everything where she'd left it. Kitchen, glass of water. She stood at the counter looking out at the parking lot. No dark blue sedan. Good, she went to the bedroom, opened the closet. Behind the hanging garment bag and a pair of winter boots she'd brought from Colorado Springs, because she couldn't explain why. She'd been in Colorado Springs training for the Olympic trials when Danny died, and she'd left everything behind when she came back except the boots. Behind all of that was a cardboard box that looked like every other unpacked box in every other moved-into apartment. It did not contain those things. Inside manifolders labeled in careful handwriting, a spiral notebook half full, a timeline annotated in pencil. A prepaid burner phone charged, powered off, turned on only for one specific kind of call. And at the bottom, a photograph, Danny Malone. Lake Mead behind him, blue and impossibly still. Fishing poles squinting into the sun, smiling the smile that only appeared when he was somewhere he considered genuinely good. Cassie standing beside him, 7 or 8 years old, looking up at him rather than at the camera. She didn't know who had taken it. Found it in his apartment after he died. In a shoebox. Took it because it was the only one where he looked completely happy. She looked at it for a moment, then put it back, closed the box back in the closet, went to bed, lay in the dark thinking about Dario's hand on her wrist and what it had cost her to stand there giving him nothing, thinking about the blue sedan and the shell company and Dex's assessment, thinking about Barone at the bar, thinking about her father. She slept. Morning came the way Las Vegas mornings come in September, suddenly all at once. The desert doesn't ease you into the day. The light just arrives, and it arrives with the intention of a thing that has somewhere to be. 5 a.m., always 5, not discipline in the aspirational sense. It's not something she did for optimization or productivity. This was just her. Had been since she was 12, training 3 mornings a week before school, before her body and her schedule merged so completely that sleeping past 5 felt like a failure of physics. She cleared the furniture to the bedroom walls and trained in the 12 by 12 space of hardwood floor. An hour and a half. And she did not think about anything while she trained, because training was the one space she had learned to keep completely clear. No strategy, no calculation. No grief, no 4-year wait, just the body. Just the work. Just the thing she'd been building since she was 12 years old in a gym in Henderson, Nevada, when a coach told her on the very first day, learn to fall first. Then learn to get up. She had gotten very good at getting up. Dex's full report arrived at 7:42. She read it twice. The shell company traced through 3 layers to a Delaware holding company to a financial management firm called Calder Associates, headquartered in Las Vegas. Additional offices in New York and Zurich. She knew that name, seen it before. In the Manila folders. Not prominently. A thread she'd pulled once and set aside because it led somewhere larger than she was ready to go. Calder Associates, Richard Calder Principal. She typed, "What do you know about Calder?" Dex's response came in 3 separate messages, his way of signaling that something warranted more than a sentence. Richard Calder, 67. Banker. Legitimate. Or appears legitimate. Harvard MBA, 40 years in financial services, former partner at 2 old established firms before going independent 15 years ago. Calder Associates manages private wealth, about $3.2 billion in assets under management on paper. The paper is interesting, investigated twice by the SEC. Once settled without admission, once dismissed. Both investigations related to the structure of certain investment vehicles later used as basis for real estate and hospitality acquisitions in Nevada and New Jersey. The Nevada acquisitions include, among others, a minority stake in the company that operates the Palazzo Sereno. She stopped reading. Read that again, minority stake in the company that operates the Palazzo Sereno. Set the coffee cup down. Third message. Almost no public footprint for a man with $3.0 billion under management, almost like he's deliberately not public. Which, as you know, is itself a form of information. She typed any documented relationship between Calder and Cataneo, not yet, but Cass. The ownership structure of the Palazzo Sereno puts Calder Associates in the same financial ecosystem as Cataneo Holdings. Whether they're in business together or just in the same neighborhood, I can't tell you yet, but someone in a Calder-affiliated car was watching you last night. She sat with that. Someone not Cataneo knew who she was and where she worked and had positioned a car to watch her leave. Either the sedan was coincidence, which she didn't believe. Danny had trained her not to believe in coincidence, Or there was a second set of eyes on La Stella. A second entity interested in what happened there. An entity that had at some point identified Cassie as relevant. Relevant to what? She closed the app, opened the manila folder labeled Notes Financial and spread it on the kitchen table. She found Calder in her own notes. Twice first, a conversation overheard at La Stella's bar 5 months ago, two men she'd never seen before or since. Written down that night from memory. RC column. Sorted before end of Q3 letters. 3 question marks next to them. Second, in the public record she'd pulled on the Palazzo Soranzo's corporate ownership. Early in her time at La Stella, she'd followed the corporate trail several layers deep, hit what she'd assumed was routine financial holding structure, note, it without following further. Calder Associates. Right there. 5 months ago, I should have pulled that thread. She sat with that judgment for a moment, then set it aside. Recrimination was as a luxury she couldn't afford and hadn't been able to for 4 years. You don't solve anything wishing you'd move faster. You solve it by moving now. She opened her laptop. She started looking for Richard Calder. What she found over 2 hours not explosive. The truth rarely is when you're doing it carefully. You find partial things, corners. Edges of shapes whose full dimensions you can't see yet. But she found enough. Calder had been in Las Vegas for over 20 years. Arrived in the early 2000s from New York with a portfolio of private clients. Built Calder Associates into a boutique firm serving specific and private people. Photographed at charity events. On the board of a children's hospital foundation. Profiled twice in financial publications, both profiles notable for being impressively vague about what he actually did. The kind of vagueness that comes not from evasive subjects, but from writers who didn't push hard enough, or from a strategy designed to generate favorable coverage without information. 67 years old. Looked in photographs like an advertisement for what money could do for aging. Silver-haired, well-tailored. The face of a man who communicated authority not through any feature but through the accumulated weight of a life in rooms. He was always the one who decided things. She found one thing that sat differently from the rest. A Nevada Gaming Commission public filing from 7 years ago. The kind of document that exists in archives nobody looks at. She'd gotten to it through 3 links on a state government website at 10 in the morning. Calder Associates. Listed as a passive financial advisor to the consortium holding the gaming license for the Palazzo Sereno. Passive financial advisor, which in Nevada gaming regulation was a specific and meaningful designation. It meant Calder Associates had passed the Gaming Commission's background investigation. They'd been vetted, considered clean. Clean enough to be in business with the Canio family's primary legitimate operation. She sat back from the laptop. The shape was becoming clearer. Not complete. But she could see the edges of something much larger than a crime family's restaurant, or even a crime family's gaming operation. Something that had potentially been there the entire time she'd been building her picture. Hiding in plain sight behind legitimate credentials and a low public profile and a minority stake in a very expensive piece of Las Vegas real estate. Her phone buzzed, unknown number, Las Vegas area code. She looked at it. Answered Miss Malone. A man's voice, older. Careful with words in the way of someone who learned long ago that carefulness is a form of power. I'm told I can reach you at this number. She said nothing. My name is Joseph Barone. I think it's time we had a conversation. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. How did you get this number? Your father gave it to me. Another silence. My father has been dead for 4 years, yes. A pause with the quality of someone choosing words with precision. He gave it to me before that. He told me if anything happened to him, and if his daughter was, his word, in the neighborhood, I should call. I've been watching Glassdale for 11 months, Miss Malone. I think 14 counts as the neighborhood. She stood up from the kitchen table, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot. No dark blue sedans. What do you want? Not what you think. Another pause. I want to tell you something your father didn't know when he was alive. Something that changes the shape of what you're looking for. He stopped. And I want to do it before Richard Calder realizes you exist. Because when he does, and he will if he hasn't already, the timeline for everything becomes much shorter. Her hand on the phone was completely still. Her voice was completely level. Where there's a church on Oakey Boulevard. St. Michael's. The original building, not the new one. 6 o'clock. Come alone. Another pause and then something she didn't expect. His voice dropped slightly. Lost its precision for just a moment, just enough to something else through. She told me you look like him, your father, exactly like him. Who said that? The line was already gone. She stood at the window for a long moment. Her father's voice, from the room she'd built for it inside her memory over 4 years, In this work, the moment you stop being surprised is the moment you get sloppy. Stay surprised. Every new piece of information is the world telling you that you didn't have the whole picture yet. That's good. That means you're still learning. She had not expected Barone to call. She had not expected her father to have given him a number. What did you know, Dad? What did you set up before the end? How many contingencies did you build? And the answer she'd been slowly arriving at for 4 years and was almost ready to accept fully, more than she knew, more than she'd found. Danny Malone had been a thorough man, a careful man. A man who understood that the work of protecting the people you love was never done, never safe enough, never finished. He'd been building a contingency for her while she'd been building her plan for him. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She went and made more coffee instead. At noon she drove to Fremont Street. Not the Fremont Street experience of tourist brochures, not the 4-block pedestrian mall with the LED canopy and the noise god, the noise. The blocks east of that where Fremont became regular city again. Hardware stores and a laundromat and a dentist, and at the corner of Fremont and 11th, some small shop with a hand-painted sign. Figs, breads, pastries, sandwiches. Est. Nantrant 87. The bell above the door rang when she pushed it open. Warm smell, yeast and olive oil and something sweet she'd eventually identified as anise, which Tony put in the ciambella on weekends without telling anyone because it was the way his mother had made it and he wasn't taking requests. Tony Fig was behind the counter doing something with a piece of dough that required his full attention. "We're out of the cornetti," he said. "I don't want a cornetto." He looked up. 63 years old. Built like a man who had spent decades doing physical work and then switched to baking without losing the muscle. Big hands. Kind eyes. A face that had been weathered by years and by things that years alone don't account for. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. The way that contained too much. Recognition and sorrow and something trying to be hope and not quite getting there. "Cassie," he set down the dough. Wiped his hands on his apron. "Come in the back." The back of Figs contained a work table, 2 mismatched chairs, a coffee maker older than Cassie, several stacks of wholesale baking supplies, and a framed photograph on the wall. Tony and Danny Malone on a fishing boat on Lake Mead, sometime in the 90s. Both of them younger and grinning and squinting into the sun. She sat in one of the mismatched chairs. He put coffee in front of her without asking. She told him about the blue sedan, Dex's findings, Calder Associates and the Palazzo Reno call. Tony listened the way he always listened. Completely still, no interruptions, big hands flat on the table, eyes on her face. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. "Your father knew about Calder," he said finally. "I know, I found his name in my notes." "Not just in your notes." Tony's hands moved. A small involuntary gesture. "Danny knew about Calder before he died. Not everything, but enough to scare him. Which took a lot to scare your father." He looked at his coffee. "He told me once that Calder was the part of it he couldn't figure out. The part that was too big. I understand Cataneo is a man with a family business who made terrible choices. But Calder." Tony stopped. "What did he say about Calder?" "He said Calder is the thing behind the thing." Tony looked at her. He said it like he was still working out what it meant. The thing behind the thing. She sat with that. "Danny trusted 3 people in this city," Tony continued. "Me, Barone, and a cop named Pruitt. Kept them separate. Didn't let them know about each other. Said it was safer that way." He picked up his coffee. "Sit down without drinking." "I knew about Barone. Didn't know Danny had given him your number." "Are you going to tell me to be careful?" "I'm going to tell you that what Barone knows might change some things you've been counting on being a certain way." "Like what?" Tony shook his head slowly. "That's not mine to tell you. It's his." She looked at him. "You know, don't you?" Some of it. He met her eyes. "Danny told me enough that I can see the shape of it, but Cass, I've known you since you were born. And I'm asking you to hear it from Barone rather than from me. Because when it lands on you, you're going to need it to come from someone who was actually there." She sat in the mismatched chair looking at Tony Figueroa, who had known her since she was born and loved her father like a brother, and something in his eyes she couldn't quite categorize. "Is it about how he died?" Tony said, "It's about why." She left Figs at 2 in the afternoon. Sat in her car without starting it, and let herself have 4 minutes of something that wasn't quite feeling but was close to it. A hum in her chest she recognized as the approach of information she'd been seeking for 4 years and hadn't had yet. Why, she knew how. For almost 2 years she'd known the mechanics of it, the cold reconstruction from evidence and inferences. Danny had gone to meet someone. The meeting was a setup. He died in an alley off Fremont Street in a location he wouldn't have chosen and wouldn't have known to avoid. And fairly certain who gave the order for 18 months. Certain enough to build the plan around it. To spend 14 months at La Stella. But why Danny specifically? Why that night? What had tipped the scale from useful informant to eliminate? What had he found? What had he done with it? 4 minutes. She started the engine, drove home, changed clothes. Lay down for an hour, not sleeping, just resting the way Danny had taught her. You can't think clearly when you're tired. Sleep can. If you can't sleep, lie still and breathe and let your body do what it can. At 5:15 she got up. She drove to Oakey Boulevard. St. Michael's was built in an era when churches were meant to communicate permanence. The original structure from 909. Stone walls. High narrow windows with colored glass catching the late afternoon light, throwing it across the interior in fragments of amber and blue. Wooden pews polished by decades of people sitting in them. An altar simple by contemporary standards but holding the dignity of age. It smelled like candle wax and old wood, and the particular quiet that accumulates in places where people have been bringing their heaviest things for a very long time. Joseph Barone was in the last pew on the left. He was sitting upright. Not devotional. A man who'd been raised in this tradition and maintained a complicated relationship with it. Dark coat. Hands folded in his lap. He heard her footsteps on the stone floor and looked up. And for a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that he didn't quite control the recognition. She looked like Danny. People had been saying it her whole life. Always that slight note of surprise, as though they expected a daughter to look like a daughter, and kept getting recalibrated by the evidence. Same jaw, same eyes, dark brown, with a specificity to the gaze that made people feel very seen. Same. Nazes had known Danny Malone for 30 years. He was looking at the face of a dead man. She sat in the pew across the aisle. The church was otherwise empty. They looked at each other. She was right, Barone said quietly. You're exactly like him. Who said that? Someone who knew him well. I'll tell you that part later if you want. First I need to tell you the part that matters. She waited. I've been in this business since I was 19 years old, he began. Not the rehearsed opening of a prepared statement. The beginning of a man who has had a conversation in his head for a long time and is finally having it out loud. I've done things I don't need to tell you about. You know the shape of this world. Your father worked inside it for 22 years. As a cop for, yes. He looked at her steadily, and then when he left the department as something more complicated. A pause. He did good work for us, Miss Malone. Whatever you think of what we are, your father wasn't a corrupt cop who turned criminal. He was a man who realized, after 20 years of law enforcement, that the law could only reach so far. That certain things were going to happen regardless of anything the system could throw at them. And he made a choice to be inside it rather than outside it, because inside it he could sometimes make it less bad. Said without apology, without self-justification. As a statement of the texture of things. She said nothing. He was the best concealer I've ever known. He understood people. He understood the shape of a situation before anyone else in the room. He could find the path through a conflict that didn't end in blood, and in this life, that's a genuine talent. A rare one. He stopped. Looked at the altar. Vincent Cattaneo didn't deserve him. The words dropped into the church's silence. What happened? She said. Your father found something. About 18 months before he died. The shape of an arrangement that none of us, not me, not Vince, not anyone inside the organization, had known about. An arrangement that had been in place, as best your father could reconstruct it, for 15 years. Calder, she said. Barone looked at her. You know, I know the name, I know the financial connection, I don't know the nature of the arrangement. He was quiet a moment. Then Richard Calder owns Vincent Cattaneo. Has for 15 years, not literally, no document says that. But financially, structurally, in the way that actually matters, Vincent operates with Calder's permission, on Calder's term, under Calder's direction. Whether he knows it or not. He paused, and for the last several years Vincent has not known it. She took that in. Vincent knows Calder controls him. Calder came to him approximately 5 years ago and made it explicit. By then the financial structure was so complete, so layered, that Vincent had no practical way out without destroying everything he'd built. So he accepted it. He accepted a reduced role. Figurehead. The face of an organization operating largely in service of Calder's interests. What are Calder's interests? Money prime. He uses the Cattaneo infrastructure, the businesses, the relationship, the legal and illegal apparatus, as a vehicle for financial operations he can't run through legitimate channels. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decade laundering. And more than that, distribution arrangements. Certain kinds of contracts. Influence in regulatory processes that benefit his legitimate business portfolio. The organization is essentially a tool. She sat in the pew and looked at the amber and blue light on the stone floor. And my father found this. Your father found this. He found it the way Danny found everything, methodically, following the money until it went somewhere shouldn't. Richard, he brought it to me first. Not to Vin. A pause. Because he knew that if Calder was really what Danny thought he was, then Vincent couldn't be trusted with the information. Vincent might have gone straight to Calder. Or Calder might have found out through Vincent that Danny knew. Yes. She looked at Barone. Is that what happened? The church was very quiet. Barone, her voice still level. Still contained. Is that what happened to my father? He looked at her for a long time. The eyes of a man who has carried something for a long time, and is about to put it down and knows there's no picking it back up. I objected, he said. I want you to know that, whatever weight that carries. I was in that room and I said it was wrong. I said Danny Malone was not the problem. I said who was in the room. A pause. Vincent Calder's representative and Carl Ness. The name landed differently from the others. She'd heard it before. A year ago from Dex in a different context. A name connected to Danny's old unit, an old detective, someone who'd worked with Danny for over a decade. She'd noted it and moved on because it had seemed like background rather than foreground. Carl Ness, she said. He was on the force with my father. He was your father's partner for 11 years. Barone said it flat and plain, no cushioning because there was none to offer. And he had been providing information to Calder's people for at least 3 years before Danny died. Danny didn't know, nobody knew. Ness was good at it. Good at the performance. She sat very still. Carl Ness. Danny 11 years the man. Who, she was suddenly remembering this, the information surfacing from somewhere in her memory. She'd been told about it. Hadn't attended the funeral. Still in Las Vegas at the time doing the administrative horror of sudden death, the death certificates and the apartment and the bank accounts. She'd been told that Danny's old unit had come, that Ness had spoken, that it had been moving. He read the eulogy. He stood at my father's grave and said words about him. He gave them Danny, she said. Barone closed his eyes for a moment. The meeting was Ness's setup. He told Danny there was an informant who wanted to come in, who had information about the organization, who would only meet Danny specifically because Danny had the reputation, because Danny's word meant something. He stopped. It wasn't an informant. It was 2 men in an alley off Fremont Street who had been paid to do what they were paid to do. She thought about her father, walking into that alley because he thought he was going to help someone. Because that was the kind of man he was. The kind who believed his word meant something. That his presence could protect people. That being willing to show up was itself a form of protection. He died because of that. He was so much like you. The best of you. She did not cry. She breathed. Carefully, deliberately. About 15 seconds. What do you have? She said. Barone looked at her. Documents. Financial records. Correspond enough to prove the full extent of the arrangement between Calder and Cattaneo. And enough to put Carl Ness at the specific intersection of Calder's operation and your father's death. I've been collecting it for 4 years, Miss Malone. Since the night it happened. Since I walked out of that room and knew I had done nothing sufficient and had to find some other way to do something sufficient. Why now? Because Calder is moved. He's been watching Cattaneo for the last 6 months, assessing. He's decided the organization has reached the end of its usefulness. Vincent will be handed to the authorities in a way carefully managed to ensure Calder himself is never part of the story. The organization will be dismantled through federal prosecution. The assets absorbed by Calder's financial structure. Calder emerges clean, untouched. He paused. And the truth about your father disappears into a sealed federal case file. He knows about me. He knows there's someone at La Stella who isn't what they appear to be. Whether he knows specifically who you are, I'm not certain. But the surveillance last night suggests he's narrowing it down. How much time? Days. Perhaps a week. She looked at the altar. She thought about 4 years. About 14 months at La Stella. About every morning at 5 o'clock in the cleared bedroom, building the thing she was building. She thought about Danny in the alley. She thought about Carl Ness at the funeral. The documents. Where are they safe? I can get them to you within 24 hours, all right. She stood from the pew, still looking at the altar, not at him. Voice what it always was, level and contained. Then she asked the question that had been sitting underneath everything else since he'd said she was right. You look exactly like him. Who told you I look like my father? Barone was quiet a moment. His partner, he said, his actual partner. Not Ness. The one before Ness. A detective named Ray Pruitt. He was the one Danny trusted when he was still on the force. She turned and looked at him. Pruitt knows who I am. Pruitt has been watching La Stella too. From a different angle. Trying to find a way to do what I've been trying to do without enough to do it. He looked at her steadily. I think the three of us together might have enough. The colored light moved on the floor as a cloud passed somewhere outside. The church was very quiet. Cassie Malone stood in the last pew of St. Michael's thinking about parallel lines converging and the mathematics of a situation that has been approaching its resolution for 4 years and is now, finally, near enough to see clearly. She thought about the thing behind the thing. Give me 24 hours, she said. She walked out into the September evening. Las Vegas was waiting. Loud and bright and completely indifferent to what had just happened inside a 90-year-old church on Oakey Boulevard. She walked to her car, she got in, she sat. And for the first time in 4 years, not the last time but the first, she allowed herself to believe this was going to end. That night she went home to her East Side apartment and spread everything across the kitchen table. The manila folders, the timeline, the spiral notebook. The careful handwriting of 4 years. She looked at the photograph of Danny at Lake Mead, the one where he was squinting into the sun and smiling the real smile. She thought about Richard Calder, 67 years old, who had never been photographed in an alley. Who had built an empire on the principle that money could make itself invisible if you arranged it correctly. Who had decided that Danny Malone was a problem that could be handed to 2 men in an alley off Fremont Street. She thought about Carl Ness, who had stood at Danny's grave and said words about him. She thought about something her father had told her years ago, driving home from a tournament. The lesson she'd thought she understood and then learned she hadn't. The most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's watching. She had been in that room for 14 months. She had been watching everything. Now it was time for everyone else to figure out what they'd missed. She put the photograph back in the box. She went to 14 months of carrying wine, and the weight of it was finally starting to lift. The documents arrived in a paper bag, not a briefcase, not a secure envelope with ceremony. A brown paper bag, the kind that sandwiches come in. Sitting on the passenger seat of a gray Ford Taurus, parked outside St. Michael's at 7:14 in the morning. Engine on. Baroni behind the wheel looking like a man who had not slept and had made his peace with that. Cassie got into the passenger seat. She looked at the bag, she looked at Barone. That's it, she picked it up. Heavier than it looked. Inside a thick manila envelope rubber banded shut, a smaller envelope on top letter-sized unsealed. The smaller one first, Barone said. She opened it. A single sheet of paper, handwritten. Not Baroni's handwriting. The script too precise, too deliberate, like someone who had written carefully because they knew the words mattered and wanted them to look like they knew it. She read it. Read it twice. Set it in her lap with her hands flat on top and looked out the windshield at the empty morning street and breathed. Because the handwriting was Danny's. He'd written it 2 weeks before he died. Not to her. With these instruction that Barone hold it, use his own judgment about when to pass it along, trust the moment when he saw it. Danny had written to Barone because he trusted Barone's instincts, more than almost anyone else's, and because he'd apparently known 2 weeks before the alley off Fremont Street, that he was close to the end of something. The letter covered 3 things. First, what Danny had found. The Calder connection laid out in detective shorthand. Dates, transaction references, names, the structure of the financial arrangement as he'd reconstructed it. Not complete. He'd written I don't have all of it yet, with the frustration she could feel even in the careful handwriting. The skeleton. The thing behind the thing named. Second, where he'd put things. A sentence that corresponded exactly with what Tony Figg had told her about the hotel on Boulder Highway. A room. A prepaid reservation. And the key which Barone produced now from his coat pocket without being asked and set on the dashboard between them. The words. She'll know what to do with what's in there. She's been trained for exactly this, even doesn't know it yet. Third, the last part. She read the last part a third time. Joe, if Cassie comes to you, it means she figured it out on her own. Which means she's better at this than I ever was, and God help anyone in her way. Tell her the following: the documents will prove Calder. But Calder will survive documents alone. He's survived investigations before. What she needs is a confession. And the only person who will confess to Richard Calder's involvement is someone more afraid of what Calder will do to them than what any legal system can offer. That person is not Vincent. That person is Carl Ness. Find a way to put Ness in a room with Cassie and let her work. She'll know what to do. She always knows what to do. She lifted her hands from the letter. Looked at Barone. He knew, she said. He was very good at his job. He knew Carl Ness would turn on him. Barones was quiet a moment. I don't think he knew that specifically. I think he knew someone's side was compromised. He hadn't identified Ness yet. Or if he had, he didn't put it in the letter. He looked at the steering wheel. Your father was the kind of man who planned for outcomes rather than specifics. He planned for something will go wrong. Someone I trusted will fail me. Cassie will have to finish this. He didn't know the exact shape. He just accounted for the possibility. She thought about that. Her father, 2 weeks before he died, sitting somewhere. She'd never know where. Maybe his car. Maybe the bar on 4th Street where he went when he needed to think. Writing a letter for a contingency he hoped wouldn't happen and was fairly certain would. The loneliness of that. The courage of it. She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the small envelope, put the small envelope in the inner pocket of her jacket next to her chest where she'd carried her phone for 14 months. Tell me about Carl Ness, she said. Ness was 61 years old. Still active. Las Vegas Metro PD detective, same unit for 23 years, with Danny as partners for 11 of those years, then split for departmental reorganization reasons. Ness had moved to financial crimes, which in retrospect had a particular irony that sat in Cassie's stomach like something cold. Financial crimes, investigating the kind of thing he was facilitating. Barone knew Ness through the specific awkward topology of a world where criminals and law enforcement occupy the same geom. He'd seen Ness twice in the context of organization business. Always peripherals, at a remove. Never directly. He's careful, Barone said. Whatever else he is, he's careful. Calder recruited him, Calder's people did. There's a man who handles that kind of acquisition. Finding people inside systems who are reachable. Everyone has a pressure point. Ness had debts. The kind that pile up in this city when you're not careful with money and certain establishments extend you credit they know you can't repay. Someone identified the debt. Someone offered a resolution. The resolution had a price. She thought about Danny. 11 years of trusting someone. The particular arithmetic of betrayal. How long it had to have been building. How many conversations, shared meals, long shifts talking about things you don't talk about anywhere else. All of it happening while the other person was calculating how to use you. He read the eulogy, she said. Barone looked at her. At Danny's funeral. Carl Ness read the eulogy. A pause, yes. She looked out the windshield. Okay, she said, just that. The word carrying everything she wasn't going to say out loud about what kind of man could do that. She picked up the thick manila envelope. I need 48 hours with these, take what you need. I need to know where Ness is, his schedule. His regular locations, I can get that. One more thing. She turned to look at him. Calder has surveillance on me. Do you know how much he's about what I've been doing? Barone considered carefully. I think he knows you're not who you presented yourself as. He may know your real name. What I don't think he knows is how much you have. If he knew you had evidence, he'd have moved more aggressively already. A pause. He's watching, not yet acting. How long does that last? Until he's certain, or until something changes his calculation? She nodded. She got out of the car. She drove home. 48 hours. She laid the documents across the kitchen table and started reading. The documents were extraordinary in the way that the truth is extraordinary. Not a single smoking gun. Not a document that, said Richard Calder, ordered the murder of Danny Malone in clean legible type. The truth almost never comes that way. The truth comes in layers, in fragments. In the accumulated weight of financial records and transaction logs and correspondence that individually means nothing, and collectively means everything. Barone had been collecting for 4 years. It showed. Bank record summaries. The kind of thing you get when someone inside an organization has been contacted to documents. Wire transfers. Payments from entities that traced through layers of corporate structure back to Calder Associates. Payments to entities corresponding to the Cataneo organization's business arms. The construction company. Waste management contracts. The restaurant group that included La Stella. The numbers were large. She wrote them down. Communications. Emails printed and annotated in Barone's careful hand. Nothing direct on its own, nothing that would survive alone in a courtroom. But in combination with the financial records, patterns emerged. Timelines. The specific choreography of money moving in ways that corresponded to events she could document. She worked through the night. Dex joined her at midnight through the secure channel. She scanning and uploading pages, he running analysis on the financial structures. Both of them working in parallel in their separate spaces, the digital equivalent of sitting across the same table. At 2 a.m, Dex sent Cass. The ownership chain on the Palazzo Sereno. I can trace it all the way through, she sent back. How? Calder Associates doesn't have a minority stake in the Sereno operating company. It is the operating company. The Catania family name is on paper. The actual controlling interest has been Coulter's for 8 years. She sat back from the table 8 years. For 8 years Vincent Cattaneo had been running what amounted to a management operation for someone else's business. The family name, the reputation, the relationships. All of it deployed in service of Richard Calder's financial architecture. The mob as a service organization. The mob as a tool, she kept reading. At 4:30 in the morning, buried in the third section of Barone's envelope, she found something that made her stop. A printout of a photograph, grainy. Surveillance quality taken through a long lens. Showing a man she didn't immediately recognize, standing outside a building she recognized immediately. The hotel on Boulder Highway. Danny's room. The key around her neck. The man was younger than he was now. Barone had written the date in the margin. 3 months before Danny died. She looked at the man, looked harder, placed him. Not from memory exactly. From a file Dex had sent her 6 months ago. A background on peripheral figures, associated with the Calder associates. She sent the photograph to Dex. 8 minutes later, that's Calder's acquisition specialist. The one who identifies and recruits compromised officials. Cast that photograph puts him at the hotel 3 months before your father died. Your father had a room in that hotel. Either he was already watching Danny. Or, she finished the sentence herself. Or he was meeting someone there. She wrote it down. Flagged it, kept reading because sleep was a luxury and she had 48 hours and the clock had been running since 7:14 in the morning. She slept 3 hours 6 to 9. The dead sleep of a complete exhaustion, woke with her cheek against the kitchen table, a page of Barone's documents under her face. Got up, made coffee, showered. Jeans and a gray pullover. Looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked tired. She looked like she knew what she was doing. Both things were true. She picked up her phone and called Ray Pruitt. The phone rang 4 times. She'd gotten the number from Barone. Not Pruitt's personal cell. The number for the detective bureau at the Metro PD substation where Pruitt worked, with instructions to ask for him specifically and not leave a message if he wasn't available. He was available. Pruitt, the voice of a man who answered phones with his name out of habit the way people do when they've been answering phones professionally long enough that it becomes involuntary. Detective Pruitt. My name is Cassie Malone. A pause. Not long, 3 seconds. But the quality of those 3 seconds was different from ordinary silence. The silence of a man who has been waiting for a call and has now received it. Where are you? He said. Does that matter right now? No. A breath. No, I suppose it doesn't. Another pause at him on the phone. He had a particular. He stopped. I'm sorry. That's not useful. It's all right. I've been trying to figure out how to find you for about 8 months, Pruitt said. Barone beat me to it. He had a head start. My father gave him a number. I know Danny didn't give me one. He gave me something else. Can we meet? Not over the phone. I need you to see my face when I say some of what I need to say. She thought about the blue city. Today. Afternoon. Somewhere public, the Springs Preserve. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. She ended the call. Sat at the kitchen table with her coffee thinking about Danny giving Barone a number and giving Pruitt something else. About parallel structures. A man who knew 2 weeks before he died that he was building contingencies and who distributed the pieces carefully, not putting all of it with any one person, because any one person could be compromised or could fail. He trusted 3 people, given each of them a different piece. The math was becoming more complete. She went back to the document. The Springs Preserve sat at the northwest of the city, 680 acres of desert landscape museum and nature center, that most tourists never found and most residents treated as a pleasant theoretical existence. On a weekday afternoon in September, the outdoor areas were lightly populated. Families with children, older couples on the walking trails, the occasional jogger in determined denial of the ambient temperature. Pruitt was on a bench near the botanical garden section, positioned under a shade structure, with sightlines to 3 approaches he'd chosen well, either from habit or from genuine operational awareness. Probably both. 61 years old. Had been thin once and had filled in over the decades in the way of someone who sits a lot and doesn't think about it. Gray at the temples. A face that had the particular lined quality of desert sun and stress in roughly equal measure. Civilian clothes. Dark pants, a light blue shirt, the clothes of someone who is off duty and wants you to know it. He saw her coming. Watched her walk the 30 yards from the path to the bench, and she watched him watching, and she thought, he's doing exactly what I'm doing. Looking for Danny in my face. She sat next to him, not across from him. The bench didn't allow it. side by side facing the desert plantings, the saguaro and the brittlebush and the ocotillo with its red-tipped spines catching the afternoon light. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He talked about you constantly, Pruitt said finally. You should know that. When he was working, during the years I knew him, which was most of his career, you were the thing he talked about when he wasn't talking about work. Your tournaments, your training. The way you fought. A pause. He said you were the best he'd ever seen at reading a situation before it became a situation. He said you could walk into a room and know in 30 seconds what the room was about and who in it was going to be a problem. He exaggerated. No, Pruitt said. He really didn't. He looked at her. You've been at La Stella for 14 months. You've built a complete picture of the Cataneo operations financial structure from a waitress's vantage point. You've made contact with Barone without alerting anyone in the organization to what you were actually doing. And you're sitting here with me right now, which means you assessed the risk of this meeting and decided it was acceptable. He looked back at the desert plantings. That's not exaggeration. That's description. She waited. What did my father give you? Pruitt reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small piece of paper, folded in quarters, the kind of fold that makes a piece of paper small enough to fit anywhere. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. 4 lines in Danny's handwriting, a date 7 months before he died. Earlier than the letter to Barone. And Ray, you know what I found, you know what it means. If I don't finish this, the only path is federal, not local. The investigation has to come from outside the city. I trust you to know who. Don't let Carl handle it. She stared at those last 4 words. Don't let Carl handle it. He knew, she said. Not completely, he suspected. Pruitt's voice careful, the voice of a man who has spent a lot of time thinking about what he knew and when he knew it and what he should have done differently. He'd noticed inconsistencies. Things Ness knew that he shouldn't have. Things Ness didn't know that he should have. He wasn't certain. He didn't say Carl's name out loud to me, just wrote this. He looked at the piece of paper in her hands. I didn't understand it completely until after Danny died. When I started going back through the timing, who knew what when, and then I understood it. And you did nothing, not an accusation. A statement. Pruitt took it. Sat with it. I tried to build a case, he said. Without Ness's knowledge. Without going through any channel Ness had access to, it was difficult. The investigation Ness belonged to at that time was positioned to intercept anything coming up through normal process. And I didn't have what you have now. A pause. I had a piece of paper and a dead man's instinct and not enough proof. More now. You have more now. He looked at her. Which is why I'm here. She folded the piece of paper. Put it in her jacket pocket with the letter from Barone's car. 2 pieces of Danny now carried against her chest. Tell me about, she said. What do you want to know? Everything. Carl Ness was the kind of man who was good at being liked. Pruitt offered this without admiration. The flat factual description of a skilled professional. The way a carpenter might describe a tool. Good at its function. Ness had come up through Metro PD in the early 90s, same intake class as Danny. Paired as partners within 2 years of making detective. They complemented each other. Danny's instinct and Ness's organizational discipline. Danny's interview skills and Ness's patience with paperwork. Clearance rates consistently among the unit's highest for 11 years. Never disciplined. Never investigated. Never credibly accused of anything. He'd been, Pruitt said, genuinely good at the job. Pruitt said. Not an incompetent cop who couldn't get the work done otherwise. Not someone desperate. He knew how to do it right. And he chose not to. When did it start? Best I can reconstruct, about 6 years before Danny died. Which was 3 years before Danny came into the organization's orbit. Ness was already in Calder's pocket when Danny became a problem. 3 years. Ness had spent 3 years in Calder's arrangement before Danny's investigation put them on a collision course. 3 years of small favors at first. Information that seemed minor. Letting certain things slip. Gradually escalating the way these arrangements always escalate. Each step making the previous step's investment more costly to abandon. He had a specific function, Pruitt continued. He monitored investigations with the potential to reach Calder's interests. When something got too close, he managed it. Sometimes by misdirecting from inside, sometimes by providing warning to allow things to be moved or restructured before investigators could document them. And when managing it wasn't enough, a pause. And when managing it wasn't enough, Pruitt confirmed. Your father wasn't the first. She looked at him. There was another case. 3 years before Danny. A forensic accountant contracted by the Nevada Gaming Commission on an audit. He got too close to the structure around the Palazzo Sereno. He had an accident. Pruitt said the word the way you say a word when it means it's opposite. Car accident, no other vehicle involved. Case closed. I only made the connection afterward. She filed that. What does Calder know about me? I don't know exactly. I know Ness has been aware of unusual activity around La Stella for about 2 months. Someone asking questions in the wrong places. I don't think he knows it's you specifically. But he knows someone's is that there. And he would have reported that to Calder. He reports everything to Calder. That's his function. She thought about the blue sedan. 2 months. Longer than she'd known about it. What does your timing look like? 3 weeks, Pruitt said. I retire in 3 weeks. After that, my access to departmental systems, to information, to the kind of official witness testimony a federal prosecution needs, becomes significantly more complicated. You're offering to testify. I'm offering everything I have. My own documentation of the investigation I ran, my assessment of Ness, my testimony about what Danny told me and when he looked at her. But it has to go to the right people, federal, not local. Danny was right about that. There's an agent in the Las FBI field office, organized crime division. Her name is Linda Greer. She was removed from the Catania investigation 2 years ago, which in this context means she's involved in that investigation who can be trusted. Linda Greer, the name landed, she stored it. I need something from you first, she said. What, Carl Ness? I need him in a room with me. Pruitt turned and looked at her. She met his eyes. Your father said you'd know what to do, he said so slowly. Was right. A long pause. The desert around them quiet and hot and indifferent, and the saguaros standing in it the way they always stand, patient and ancient and completely unbothered by the specific urgencies of human beings passing through their territory. He has a regular poker game, Pruitt said finally. Thursday nights. Private. At a house in Henderson. Organized by another detective who doesn't know about Ness's arrangement. 6 players, same group for years, starts at 8. A pause. He walks to his car alone at the end of the night. Usually between 11 and midnight. She said nothing, was thinking. Not about Thursday night. About the conversation she needed to have before Thursday night. About a man who was 62 years old and tired and sitting inside a prison of his own construction, and who might, if approached correctly, be willing to tell the truth. I need one more thing, she said. I figured I need to get to Vincent Cataneo. The first call she made when she got back to her car was to Tony Figg. He picked up on the second ring, sounds of the bakery in the background, the industrial mixer, a radio playing something classical. The ambient warmth of a working kitchen. How'd it go? Better than expected. She started the car, turned on the air conditioning. Tony. I need to get to Vincent Cataneo. Not through Barone. Directly. I need a channel. Calder's people don't monitor a silence. Cassie, I know. Vincent Cataneo is not. I know what he is. I know everything he is. She pulled out of the terrified. Calder is moving to cut him loose. He's going to end up in federal prison or dead, and from his perspective those outcomes are approximately equivalent. I have something he needs. And I need something from him. Another silence, longer. There's a priest, Tony said finally. Father Dennis, at St. Michael's. The same church you met Barone. He's been Vincent's confessor for 30 years. He can't repeat anything said in confession, but he can carry a message. Barone's connection. Danny's originally. Danny and Father Dennis went way back. His voice shifted slightly. Danny used to say Father Dennis was the only man in Las Vegas who heard everything and told nothing, which made him either the best priest in the city or the best detective. And he wasn't sure there was a difference. She thought about her father finding channels everywhere, building relationships in every layer of the world he moved through, planning for a future he wouldn't see. I'll go St. Michael's tonight, she said. I'll make a call first. Give me an hour. She drove east through the afternoon city that blazed and pulsed and moved around her, with its complete disinterest in the weight of what she was carrying. Dad, are you watching this? Can you see how many people you trusted and how many of them held? You built something. I'm going to finish it. Father Dennis was 71 years old and built like a man who had voiced once and had been reduced by age into something more elemental, small now, white-haired. Wearing the particular plainness of a working priest, dark shirt, clerical collar, the kind of shoes that said function over everything else. He met her vessels of St. Michael's at 8 in the evening. He looked at her face, he said, without preamble, you are unambiguously Danny Malone's daughter, I've been told. He was a good man. Said simply. Complicated. As most good men are, but good. He looked at her steadily. Your friend Tony says you need to reach Mr. Cataneo. Can you do that? The question isn't can I, the question is whether it serves something worth serving. He studied her. I'm not a messenger for violence or revenge. No violence, she said. I want a conversation. I want him to tell me the truth, and what will you do with it? I'll give it to people who will use it the right way. He considered this for a long moment. He's at his house, Father Dennis said. He rarely leaves it these days. He's not well, not physically. A man his age who carries what he carries. He looked at the altar just visible through the open sanctuary door. He confesses more frequently than he used to. That tells you something. She waited. I'll call him, Father Dennis said. I'll tell him what you've told me. That you're Danny Malone's daughter and you want to talk and you're not there to harm him. What he does with that is his choice. When will you know? Give me until tomorrow morning. She thanked him. She walked out of St. Michael's into the night and stood on the sidewalk under the specific dark of this city. The dark that wasn't really dark because the sky was always lit from below by the strip's enormous indifferent glow. Tomorrow morning, she could work with that. She worked. Home documents spread across the table again. She called Dex at 10 p.m. and they went through the financial analysis section by section, Dex walking her through the specific mechanisms. The wire transfers and the corporate structures and the pattern of payments that corresponded, with a few days margin specific events in the Cataneo organization's timeline. The structure is elegant, Dex said through the secure line, the voice of someone who had been looking at screens for too many hours and was energized rather than depleted by it. Technically, it's genuinely elegant. Calder's people built something with about 8 layers of deniability for every single transaction. Each layer is defensible on its own. It's only when you see all of them together, in sequence, with the correspondence and the event timeline, that the pattern becomes undeniable. Can you build something that shows it clearly? For people who aren't financial experts. I've been building it for the last 3 hours. A pause. It's going to be a very long spreadsheet. Linda Greer won't need a spreadsheet, no, but juries do. Another pause. Cass. This is a RICO case. Federal RICO. What we're building here, what Barone gave you combined with what I've been finding, combined with whatever Pruitt has, this is not a small thing. This is not a local conviction, she knew. Had known for 4 years increasingly what the shape of the thing she was pursuing actually was. It had started as a daughter looking for her father's killer. It had become gradually something larger. Something that encompassed not just Danny's death but the entire architecture that had made his death possible and rational from inside the logic of the people who ordered it. Calder hadn't killed Danny because Danny was a threat to a crime family. Calder had killed Danny because Danny was a threat to a financial empire. The distinction mattered. How long to complete the analysis, she said. 24 hours. Maybe 30. I may have additional material within 48 hours. From Cataneo himself. If he agrees to talk, a silence. No, she said, I'm not sure about anything right now. I'm working with what I have. Your approach, Dex said. She looked at the window. At the parking lot below, lit and empty. Yeah, she said. I think. She worked until 3 in the morning, then she slept. Father Dennis called at 7:45. He'll see you. The priest's evening at his home, she said. How did he seem? A pause. Like a man who has been waiting for a conversation he was afraid of, Father Dennis said. And is now relieved it's coming. The house was in summer. Not the gated community Summerlin of luxury subdivisions with fountains at the entrance, deeper than that. An older section where the houses were large but not ostentatious. The kind of wealth that expressed itself in square footage and quality materials rather than visible performance. A wall, a gate. Presumably security. When she buzzed at 8 p.m. the gate opened immediately, and the man who came to the front door to meet her was not a bodyguard. It was Vincent Cataneo himself. She'd seen photographs. She'd seen him at La Stella across the dining room at his father's table on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always at a distance. Always in the particular remove of someone being observed rather than engaged. Up close he was different from her expectation. 62 years old. He'd been heavier in photographs from 5 years ago. Thinner. The silver hair she recognized from across the restaurant was the same, but the face beneath it had the slightly hollowed quality of someone who has been carrying weight for a long time, and whose body has started to register the cost. He was wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt. The clothes of a man at home. He looked at her, the double take. The same one she'd been watching people do her entire life. The recognition of a face that couldn't be explained by anything in the present. Come in, he said. She came in. The house was quiet, no staff visible. The interior of a man of a certain generation and certain tastes, dark wood. Good rugs, art on the walls that was real rather than decorative. The accumulated weight of a life that had spent money carefully on the things it valued. He led her to a study, books, a gas fireplace unlit. This being September in Las Vegas. 2 leather chairs angled toward each other with a small table between them, and on the table a bottle of mineral water and 2 glasses. She sat. He sat across from her. He poured water for both of them. The gesture of hospitality that was also the gesture of a man who needed something to do with his hands. He looked at her for a long moment. You look exactly like him, so I'm told. It's not a small thing to look exactly like someone who he stopped. Looked at the unlit fireplace. I didn't order it. She waited. I know means nothing to you, he said. Or perhaps it means something, but not enough. I understand that. I'm not saying it because I expect absolution. He looked at his hands. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've been needing to say it to the right person for 4 years, and you are, apparently, the right person. Tell me what happened. He told her. It matched Baron's account in essential structure and differed in emotional texture. Because Baron had told her the facts of it, the mechanics, and Cataneo was telling her the experience. What it felt like to be in a room where a decision was made that he didn't want to make and couldn't stop. What it felt like to be a man who thought he was running something, and discovered, in the specific moment when it mattered, that he'd been running nothing for years. That the decision wasn't his to make or refuse. That Calder's representative had laid out the necessity and the terms and the consequences of non-compliance, and the only power Cataneo had retained was the power to nod. I told them no, Cataneo said. I said we find another way. I said Danny Malone was not an enemy, he could be reasoned that. He stopped. They listened. They nodded. They did it anyway. The room was very quiet. Calder's representative, she said. The man who was in that room, his name, Andrew Reese. Calder's director of risk management, she stored it, and Carl Ness. Cataneo closed his eyes for a moment. Ness came to me afterward. He wanted confirmation that the organization would provide certain assurances, that there would be no internal investigation into what happened. He was nervous. Not the nervous that comes from conscience. The nervous that comes from exposure. He was protecting himself. He opened his eyes. I told him there would be no investigation. What I didn't tell him was why. Why? Because by that point I already knew Calder was going to discard us, all of us. The writing was there, in the way Reese spoke, in the financial restructuring I'd seen beginning. I knew I was already in the process of being removed. He looked at her steadily. I kept my mouth shut about Ness because Carl Ness is an insurance policy. A man directly involved in the death of a Las Vegas detective who is currently serving on the police force. That's not a resource you use immediately. You keep it. For when you need it. She looked at him. And now you need it. And now, Cataneo, I believe that if I don't use every resource I have in the next very short period of time, I am going to die or spend the rest of my life in a federal prison. Which, at 62 with my health, is the same thing. He looked at her without flinching. You have something. Baron told me you have the financial documentation. Pruitt is offering his testimony. What do you need from me? She said it plainly. A full statement. Everything you know about Calder's arrangement with your organization. Everything Reese said in that room. Every instruction you received. Every meeting. Every instance of Calder's people directing the organization's activities. She paused. And Carl Ness. You have leverage on him. I need you to use it. He was quiet a moment. You want him to confess. I want him in a room where he understands that confession is the only option he has. She held his gaze. My father wrote, in a letter I now have, that Ness is the connective tissue, the direct link between Calder's order and Danny Malone's death. Without his testimony, Calder has deniability. And with it, Calder doesn't. Another silence. The gas fireplace sat cold and unlit between them. Outside, somewhere distant, Las Vegas carried on its endless performance. Cataneo looked at her for a long time. The assessment of someone trying to determine the exact nature of what he was dealing with. How much intelligence? How much restraint? Whether the person across from him could be trusted with the spiffant trust of a shared purpose. Your father, Cataneo said slowly. I knew him for 6 years. See, he stopped. Reconsidered. He was the conscience of an organization that didn't deserve one. He knew what we were. He never pretended otherwise. But he consistently found the way through conflicts that didn't require things he couldn't undo. He was, in a strange and specific way, the best thing that organization ever had access to. He paused. I don't expect you to forgive me for not protecting him. But I want you to know that I understood his value. Even when I failed to honor it. She said nothing. She let the statement sit. Then she said, I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to finish what he started. Will you help me or not? Vincent Cataneo, tired and diminished and sitting in the house he'd built over a lifetime of choices he was now accounting for, looked at the daughter of the best thing he'd ever thrown away. He said, tell me what you need. She left Cataneo's house at 10:30. Dad. Dad. Are you seeing this? She thought about Danny writing the letter. Trusting the people he'd chosen. Distributing the pieces carefully. building toward an outcome he wouldn't live to see. You built this, all of it. I just had to find them. She started the car. Drove home, called Dex from the parking lot. I have Cataneo, she said. A silence. Wait. Voice had the someone recalibrating rapidly. You actually have. He'll give a full statement. He'll use what he has on Ness to get Ness in a room. Cassie. A pause. When Barone's documents combine with Catanteo's statement and Pruitt's testimony and Ness's confession, that's not just a case, that's, I know what it is. Calder is done. That's the point. She got out of the car, walked up to her apartment, did the walkthrough, 3 minutes, every room. Everything where she'd left it. She went to the kitchen. Looked at the document spread across the surface. 4 years of careful assembly, almost complete now. She thought about Thursday night. Carl Ness. A poker game in Henderson. 11 p.m. She walking to his car alone. She'll know what to do. Yes, Dad. I think I do. Thursday came the way important days always come. Exactly like every other day. The sun. The heat. The Las Vegas morning that refused to acknowledge the weight of what was scheduled to happen in it. She trained from 5 to 6:38. Went through the documents one more time, looking for what Calder's defense would attack, and how each potential attack was answered by something else in the record. There were gaps. There were always gaps. The question was whether the gaps were fatal or manageable. She had concluded after several passes that they were manageable. What she had was overwhelming in aggregate even where it was incomplete in specific. Cataneo's statement would close most of the most important gaps, and what Ness would add, if she could get it, would close the last one. At noon she called Barone. Tonight, she said. Are you certain? Cataneo is using the leverage. Ness has been told there's a conversation needed. He thinks it's a matter of a continued assurances. The kind of meeting Ness would recognize as routine maintenance of his arrangement. She paused. He'll be there, where? Cataneo's place. 11 p.m. after the poker game. A silence. Assassin as a witness. As the person who knows what's in those documents and can answer questions about how they were obtained if Ness challenges their authenticity. She paused. And because someone should be there who was in that room 4 years ago, who told them it was wrong. Another fuss. Someone should be there who knew my father. A very long silence. Then Barone said, I'll be there. She spent the afternoon in the cleared space of her bedroom where she trained every morning. She did the stillness exercise her original Taekwondo coach had taught her when she was 12 years old, and still tended toward the impatience of someone who had learned they were good at something and wanted to deploy it constantly. The exercise was simple. You stood there. You breathed. You let everything that was happening in your mind run out. Like water draining from a basin. Just let it go until nothing was left except the next breath, the present moment. The body standing in a room. It took 40 minutes that afternoon. Usually it was faster. But there was a lot in the basin today. Eventually the planning stopped. The calculating stopped. The 4-year wait stopped for 20 minutes, and there was just the room and the light, and her own breathing and the body she'd been building for 14 years and the simple, completely reliable fact of her own competence. She knew what she was doing. She was ready. 8 p.m. She drove to Henderson. Not to the poker game. She drove to the neighborhood where the game was happening and parked 2 blocks away and waited. This was the part nobody saw in the version of things told afterward. The waiting. 90 minutes in a car in a Henderson neighborhood at night, watching shadows, and listening to traffic and thinking about nothing in particular because you've done all the thinking there is to do, and now it's just time. She thought about Danny. Not strategically, not tactically, just her father, the man. The fishing photograph. The phone calls after tournaments, always from his car, always slightly hoarse from yelling support from the stands. The Sunday night pasta, sauce from scratch, his mother's recipe, starting at noon for a dinner at 6, non-negotiable regardless of what else was happening. She thought about him at his kitchen table, 2 weeks before he died, writing a letter for a contingency he was trying to make sure he didn't need. You planned everything, Dad. Except the part where I miss you. At 10:58, a message from the Mantanov positioned outside the poker house. He's leaving now, walking to car. She started the engine. She drove. Carl Ness was 58 steps from his car when her headlights found him. She pulled up alongside him, stopped, lowered the window. He looked at the car. At her, he didn't know her face. She'd made sure of that. In 14 months at La Stella, the one person she'd been most careful never to allow proximity to was Ness. Because Ness had the access to department records to connect a face to a name to a dead detective's daughter. He didn't know her. Detective Ness, she said. He looked at her with the wariness of a man perpetually alert to things that don't fit their context. Mr. Cataneo asked me to drive you to his house. There's something he needs to discuss tonight. The wariness and the specific calculation underneath it. The weighing of strangeness against the pattern he'd been operating in for 6 years, which included, periodically, messages delivered in unexpected ways by people he didn't know on behalf of people he did. He got in the car. The drive to Summerlin took 18 minutes. Ness asked 2 questions. Where they were going. Who she was. She gave a name that wasn't her name, someone employed by the organization in a capacity Ness wouldn't know to check against. He stopped asking questions after that. She drove. Aware in her peripheral vision of the quality of his stillness. A cop's stillness. The stillness of a man who read situations for a living and was currently reading this one and not being entirely satisfied with what he found. She kept her face neutral. Her hands steady on the wheel. Thought about nothing, drove. Cataneo was in the study when they arrived. Barone was there, seated in one of the leather chairs, silver-haired still, the way he was always still. He looked up when Cassie and Ness came in. And the moment Carl Ness saw Barone, she felt the change in him, not dramatic, not theatrical. A very small, very controlled adjustment. The recalibration of someone who has received an unexpected data point and is incorporating it rapidly. He'd expected Cataneo. But Barone in this specific room at this specific hour was a variable he hadn't prepared for. He looked at Cassie, she looked back. Please sit down, Carl, Cataneo said. A pause. Ness sat. She sat in the chair she'd sat in 2 nights before. The one across from Cataneo, which put Ness between her and Barone, which was not accident. At Barone. Ness looked at Cataneo. Back at Cataneo. What's this about? His voice was steady. 23 years on the force gave you that. The ability to keep your voice completely steady while your mind was doing something very different, Cataneo said. This is about Danny Malone. The room was very quiet. Cassie watched Ness's face. He was good. She'd been prepared for good. 14 months practicing disappearing in rooms required understanding what good performance looked like, the texture of a face managing its own expression. The microtells that appear when someone is working hard to appear natural. He was good. He registered the name without visible response. Except his hands folded in his lap, moved.
Just slightly.
Adjust. Hands adjust. When they receive information the body has already processed before the mind has. What about Malone? Ness said. And Cassie said his daughter. Ness turned. He looked at her. And this time the control held for about 1 second, and then something underneath shifted. The way ice shifts when the temperature changes. A structural movement invisible on the surface, but felt. She looked back at him. She didn't say anything else. She let him sit in the room with the fact of who she was. What happened over the next 45 minutes was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. No raised voices. No table pounding. No theatrical confrontation. What happened was the slow, methodical application of information to a man who had built his survival on information being controlled and contained, and who was now watching that control collapse layer by layer. Cataneo presented the financial documents first. A curated selection focused specifically on the transactions connecting Calder's arrangement to specific decisions made by the organization, including specifically the decision about Danny Malone. He laid them on the He let Ness look at them. Ness looked at them with the face of a professional. Neutral. Assassin. Cassie opened the manila envelope she'd brought and placed Barone's document on the table too. The correspondence. The evidence of Ness's specific role in the information chain that had led to Danny's death. She watched him calculate. Barone spoke once. He said, in multiple locations. With people outside's room. Ness said nothing. Cassie said, there's also Ray Pruitt. Ness looked at her. He's been building his own file for 4 years. He'll test. What you're looking at now is a portion of what exists, not all of it. She held his gaze. What all of it combined does is this. It puts you in the specific chain of events leading to my father's death, not as a peripheral figure. As the primary facilitating link between Calder's order and the men in the alley. Ness was very still. Rico, Cassie said. Federal, not local. You know what that means for the timeline and the sentencing side. You know what cooperation means. You know the difference between cooperating witness and primary defendant. She paused. You've explained that difference to people yourself. Across a table not unlike this one. He looked at the documents. He looked at Barone. He looked at Cataneo. He looked at her. And she looked back with the same look she'd given him when they'd driven here. The look that contained everything, every calculation complete, every variable accounted for. The absolute Unnerving patience of someone who has been building toward this moment for 4 years and is not, under any circumstances, going to rush it now. What do you want? He said. A full statement. Everything you know about Calder's arrangement with the Canio organization. Your specific role in the management of investigations that posed risk to that arrangement. Your specific role in the events leading to Danny Malone's death. She paused, and Andrew Reese, we need him placed in the chain as well. A very long silence, the gas fireplace unlit. The books on the walls. The city outside, bright and indifferent, and in return. I'm not the prosecutor. I can't offer you terms. What I can tell you is that the difference between what a cooperating witness receives and what a primary defendant receives in a federal RICO prosecution is substantial, and that the person you'd be cooperating against is Richard Calder, who has significantly more resources and significantly more reason to ensure that you specifically don't survive the process. She held his gaze. He's already planning to discard everyone in this room. You know that. You've known it for at least 6 months. Ness looked at his hands. She watched him. This was the moment Danny's letter had described. The moment you put Ness in a room where confession is the only option, and let her work. She'd done the work. She sat back. She let the silence do the rest. He talked for 2 hours. She recorded it. Barone witnessed it. Cataneo's lawyer arrived at midnight, a man who had served the organization for 20 years and had Ness sign each the transcript as it was produced. Carl Ness talked. He talked about the recruitment 6 years ago. The debt. The approach. The specific calibration of pressure and reward that had turned a 23-year detective into a man who worked inside a system while being paid to undermine it. He talked about the investigations he'd managed. The redirections. The information he'd provided about ongoing law enforcement activity that allowed certain things to be moved or restructured before they could be documented. He talked about Danny Malone. He said Dee's name, and he said what he'd done, and he said it in a room with Danny's daughter sitting 4 feet away, and he did not look at her while he said it. She did not look away from him. She listened. She let it land the way it had to land, all of it. Every detail of how her father had been led to the place where he died. She let it land, and she breathed through it, and she held herself completely still. And she did not cry, and she did not speak, and she let the recording capture every word. Because this was not the place for her grief. Her grief was hers. This was the place for the work. When he finished, she gathered the signed pages, put them in the manila envelope, looked at Carl Ness. He looked back at her. She said, "My father trusted you for 11 years. He said nothing. He trusted you," she said, "and you stood at his grave." She stood up. She picked up her envelope. She walked out of the room. Outside, the Summerlin air was warm and still. Barone came out after her. He stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Are you all right?" he said finally. She thought about it. "No," she said. "Not right now," he nodded. He answered, "Some truths need to be fixed immediately." "What happens now?" he said. "Then we call Linda Greer." She looked at the sky. "And then it goes to the people whose job it is to finish it. And I go home," she said, "and tomorrow morning I train from 5 to 6:30. She paused. "And then I figure out what comes after this." She walked to her car. Sat in it. She sat in the warm Summerlin night and let herself have 10 minutes of something that wasn't strategy or planning or the long patient wait of 4 years working toward a purpose. She thought about Danny at Lake Mead with his fishing pole, squinting into the sun. "It's done, Dad." "Not finished, that takes longer." "But done." She started the car. She drove home through the city that didn't care what had just happened. At 2 in the morning, Dex sent a message, analysis complete. "It's everything, Cass, it's everything." She looked at the message from her kitchen table. She looked at the document spread across the surface. She looked at the photograph of Danny, which she had moved out of the box and onto the table tonight for the first time. Because tonight felt like the kind of night that warranted it. Danny at Lake Mead. Fishing pole, real smile. She picked up her phone. She typed back to Dex, "Tomorrow morning we send it." She put the phone down. She looked at her father's face. She said quietly, to the empty apartment almost. Just that almost Friday morning came without ceremony. No thunder, no weather event. No atmospheric acknowledgement of the fact that the night before, in a study in Summerlin, a man who had spent 6 years betraying everyone he knew had finally told the truth about what he'd done. Just the desert sun, arriving all at once, indifferent and absolute. Cassie was up at 5, of course she was. She put on her shorts and her t-shirt and she went to the cleared space in her bedroom and she trained. Not because she had excess energy. Not because she wasn't exhausted in a way that went down to a level below the physical. Because the training was the one thing she owned completely. The one thing hers since she was 12 years old, that no one had ever taken and no amount of grief or planning or 4-year wait could touch. She trained from 5 to 6:30. Then she made coffee, then she called Ray Pruitt. "It's done," she said when he answered 2 words. The weight of them settling into the morning silence between them. A pause on his end. Long enough that she wondered if the connection had dropped. Then all of it, Ness's full statement. On recording, she poured her coffee. Cacataneo is ready to formally cooperate. Barone's documents complete, your files, Dex's financial analysis. She set the pot down. "We have everything." Danny would. Pruitt stopped Art again. "He would be very proud of you." She stood at the kitchen counter with her coffee and breathed for a moment. "I know," she said. "I know he would. What do we do now?" "Now we call Linda Greer." She called Greer at 8 a.m., not through official channels. Through a personal number Pruitt had given her. A cell number. The number of an FBI agent who had been pulled off a major investigation 2 years ago for not cooperating with the direction the investigation was taking, which in context meant not being willing to follow a lead away from where the real answer was. The phone rang 3 times. Greer, single word. The voice of someone who answered every call, ready to work. "My name is Cassie Malone. I'm the daughter of Danny Malone, a Las Vegas Metro detective who died 4 years ago in what was ruled a robbery." A pause. "I know who Danny Malone was," Greer said. "Careful. Why are you calling me?" "Because I have a complete evidentiary package connecting Richard Calder to the death of my father, to the systematic corruption of a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police detective, and to 30 years of organized financial crime conducted through the Cataneo organization." She paused. "And because Ray Pruitt told me you're the only person in the Las Vegas field office I can trust to receive it." A very long silence then. "How complete?" "Financial documentation covering 15 years of the Calder-Cataneo arrangement. A signed, recorded confession from the law enforcement officer who facilitated the arrangement, and whose actions contributed directly to my father's death. A cooperation agreement from Vincent Cataneo. Supporting testimony from a former member of the organization." She paused one more time. An independent financial analysis correlating all of it. She could hear Greer breathing. The breathing of someone doing rapid calculation. "Where can we meet?" "Somewhere without cameras. Somewhere not connected to either of our regular patterns." She set down her coffee. "You choose, but make it today." Another pause. "There's a park on the north side of the city. Lone Mountain Regional. Trailhead at the east entrance." 10 a pause. "Come alone, I'll be there." She ended the call. She looked at the documents on her kitchen table. "At the photograph of Danny last leg, Dad," she said. Lone Mountain Regional Park sat at the northern edge of the developed city, where the suburbs gave way to open desert, and the mountain rose out of flat ground with the abruptness that only desert geology produces. Sudden and definitive, as if the land had simply decided to be different here. At 10 a.m. on a Friday in September, the park was lightly used. Dogwalkers, serious hikers getting an early start before the heat made the trails punishing. The occasional retiree on a morning constitutional. Greer was at the trailhead exactly she said she'd be. 47 years old, dark hair pulled back. Civilian clothes, jeans, a light jacket that wasn't in the September warmth but served a specific practical function she didn't need to explain. Kind of person whose competence announced itself, without announcement. Cheapet Cassie's stillness announced something about her. Not through any visible credential, but through the simple undeniable quality of a person who knows exactly what they're doing at all times. She looked at Cassie the way everyone looked at Cassie. "God," she said. "You really do look like him, so I keep being told." They walked, not into the park, along its perimeter on a concrete path beside the parking area. Visible enough that they didn't look like people having a covert meeting. Private enough that they couldn't be overheard. Cassie carried a bag inside copies of everything, the complete package. Dex had prepared it the night before with the methodical precision of someone who understood that everything going into a federal investigation would be scrutinized by very capable defense attorneys and that every I needed dotting and every T crossing. She handed it to Greer. Greer took it, held it. Did not open it immediately. "Walk me through it," she said, so Cassie walked her through it. She started with the financial structure, the Calder Associates' connection to the Palazzo Sereno, the ownership chain that put Calder in actual control of an operation bearing the Cataneo family name. She moved through the transaction patterns, the 15 years of documented cash flows. She explained the correspondence, the instructions, the specific instances where Calder's representative had directed organizational decisions. She talked about Andrew Reese. Greer's eyes sharpened at that name. She knew it. She talked about Carl Ness, the recruitment. 6 years of operation side Metro. The specific investigations managed on Calder's behalf. The decision regarding Danny Malone and Ness's specific roles in its execution. Greer walked and listened. She didn't interrupt. This was the mark of someone who actually listened. Not the urge to interject or demonstrate comprehension or perform attentiveness. Greer simply listened. Her eyes moved occasionally, processing, but her body was still and her face was working quietly through whatever internal calibration a federal agent runs when she is being handed something that is either exactly what it appears to be or something else entirely. The confession, Greer said when Cassie finished. Ness signed and witnessed. Catanio's lawyer was present. He'll retract it, he can try. The recording will be harder to retract. Greer looked at her. You recorded it continuously. From the moment he got into my... A pause. Nevada is a one-party consent state, Greer said, working through it, as long as you were party to the conversation. I was present throughout. Every word on that recording was spoken with me in the room or the car. She paused. I looked it up. Greer almost smiled. Almost. He raised you right, she said. He taught me to check the rules before I relied on something. She paused. He said procedures matter as much as outcomes. That the cleanest truth falls apart if you collected it wrong. Greer stopped walking. She looked at the mountain. At its abrupt, definitive rise out of the desert floor, she said, I was paused at the Canio investigation 2 years ago because I was getting too close to the financial structure, not the organization. The financing. They told me I was chasing threads that didn't lead anywhere productive and that my focus was creating noise slowing the main investigation. A pause. I knew then that someone inside the process was managing my investigation. I didn't know who. I didn't know why me specifically. But I knew. Ness, Cassie said. I would have gotten to Calder, Greer's voice quiet. Not angry, the analytical tone of someone who has had a long time to process something. Whatever was is 2 years away, given what I was finding before they pulled me. I would have gotten there. She looked at Cassie's. Ness bought Calder 2 years. He bought him more than that. Yes, a pause, he bought him Danny Malone. The mountain sat there. Patient and indifferent and entirely uninterested in the specific human reckoning happening at its base. Greer held the bag. Give me 72 hours to go through this, verify the chain of custody on the financial documents, run the recording through our authentication process. She paused. If it holds, and I believe it holds, I can have an arrest warrant for Calder in front of a federal judge within 5 days. Cassie said, Calder is moving, he's planning to restructure before the end of the month. Discard the Catania organization and clean his own position before any investigation reaches him. How solid is that timeline? Solid enough that I wouldn't wait the full 5 days. Greer looked at her. Something passed between them. The understanding of two people who have assessed the same situation through different routes and arrived at the same conclusion. 3 days, Greer said. I can move in 3 days. Then move in 3 days. Greer nodded once. Clean, final. She started walking back toward the parking area. Then stopped, turned. Miss Malone. Her voice shifted slightly. Not losing professionalism, adding something to it. I've been in this job for 19 years. I've worked organized crime cases for 14 of them. She paused. What you put together. The patience of it, the precision of it, the way you assembled the pieces without compromising the investigation or giving anyone cause to challenge the evidence's integrity. She stopped. Your father would be astonished. Cassie looked at her. He'd say it's what he trained me for, she said. Even if neither of us knew it at the time. Greer held her gaze for a moment. Then she turned and walked to her car. And Cassie stood at the edge of the parking area with the mountain behind her and she thought, 3 days. 3 days is a long time when you're waiting. It is also, as it turns out, no time at all. She went home. Organized the documents, put them in the manila envelopes. Labeled them, filed them. Looked at the cleared table. She didn't know what to do with the cleared table. She'd had papers on that table for 4 years. She called Tony Fig. A silence on, she's end. Then a sound she hadn't heard from him before. A kind of exhale, long and complete, the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding for. Okay, the Tony said. Just that. Okay, I thought you might want to know. I did want to know. A pause. Cassie, come in this morning. I'll make the cannoli. The real ones, not the display ones. She almost laughed. The display ones aren't cannoli. They're not the real cannoli. There's a difference. Come in at noon. She went in at noon. She sat in the back room of Fig's, in the mismatched chair, and Tony made cannoli from scratch and brought them back on a plate and they ate them and didn't talk about Richard Calder or Carl Ness, or federal investigations or any of it. Tony talked about his daughter in Phoenix who had just had a baby. Tony's third grandchild, a girl. Named something Tony couldn't quite pronounce on account of his daughter having married into a family with names that required sounds the Italian-American palate hadn't fully equipped him for. Cassie talked about nothing in particular. They ate. The cannoli were undeniably the real ones. There was a difference. At some point, Tony looked at the photograph on the wall, the fishing boat and Lake Mead and Danny and Tony in their younger versions, and he said quietly, he would have loved this. Knowing it was done, he would have. He stopped. You know what he would have said, actually. What he would have said, now can we please go fishing? Tony shook his head slowly. He always said that. Whatever we'd been through afterward, he always said, can we go fishing? Like the lake was waiting and we'd been rude to keep it waiting. She looked at the photograph. Lake Mead is still there, Dad. It waited. She ate the rest of her cannoli. Day 1 she went to see Barone, not at St. Michael's. At his condominium in the southwest of the city, understated. The home of a man who had spent decades not drawing attention to himself. He looked, when he opened the door, like he'd slept for the first time in a long time. She told him the FBI was moving. He nodded. You'll need a lawyer. A good one, federal. I have one. Someone who understands cooperation agreements and what full cooperation means in a RICO case. I've had a lawyer for 30 years who understands exactly that. A pause. Your father recommended him originally. She stood in the doorway of Barone's condominium, thinking about Danny recommending lawyers to the underboss of the organization he was advising, about the specific, strange, impossible to categorize life her father had led, working inside something he never fully belonged to, maintaining something that functioned like integrity in a place that had no structural use for integrity. Barone, she said. He looked at her. Thank you for keeping the letter. He was quiet for a moment. He asked me to, he said.
It was the last thing he asked me directly. A pause.
I've spent 4 years being glad I had something to keep. She left him there. She drove home. Day 2 she called Northwestern University School of Law. Not the most famous law school in America. The one Danny had mentioned once in a way that was offhand and not offhand at all. The way he mentioned things he wanted her to notice without making them into instructions. She'd been 20 years old, still competing, still not thinking about what came after competing. He'd said Northwestern has a good criminal law program. Public interest focus. Not everyone who goes there wants to make money. Some of them actually want to do the thing. She called the admissions office, asked about the process for non-traditional applicants, wrote down what they told her, sat at her cleared kitchen table and filled out the preliminary inquiry form and sent it, then sat for a while with the feeling of having done something for the future rather than about the past. It felt different, unfamiliar, slightly, but not bad. Day 3, she trained from 5 to 6:30, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and waited. At 9:17 a.m. Greer called. We're moving tonight, Greer said. I need you to stay some ending to Calder or the Sereno or any part of this. We don't want you anywhere near it when it happens. Understood. The authentication came back clean. Everything, the recordings, the financial documents, the chain of customs, drones, materials. A pause. Cassie. This is solid. This is going to hold. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. How did you know it would? Greer asked. That it would be solid enough when you started. She thought about the question. She thought about 14 months at La Stella. About 5 a.m. sessions. About the cleared kitchen table with documents across it. About Father Dennis and the letter in her pocket and the key on her neck and the photograph that used to be in the box. She thought about Danny in the car, driving home from a tournament, talking about furniture. I didn't know, she said. I just knew it was the right direction. A pause. That sounds like him too, Greer said. Then, go somewhere tonight. Don't watch the news, don't check anything, just be somewhere that isn't this. Cassie said, okay. She ended the call. She looked at the window. She looked at the parking lot below, lit by morning sun. All right, Ming, she called Tony Fig. Tonight, she said. I need to be somewhere that isn't here. Come for dinner, Tony said immediately. I'm making pasta, Tony. You also makes pasta. These are not in conflict. A pause. Come at 7, bring nothing. She spent the afternoon doing the things that ordinary life contains, and that she had not adequately attended to for 14 months because ordinary life had been a performance rather than a reality. She went to the grocery store. She cleaned her apartment. Not the functional cleaning of someone maintaining a space, but the actual cleaning of someone who was going to live in a space rather than occupy it on the way to something else. She called her aunt in Tucson, Barbara, her mother's older sister. A woman named Barbara, who had known Danny only briefly and distantly, but had loved Cassie for her entire life, and who had been, over the past 4 years, An intermittent presence Cassie had kept at careful distance, because the closeness felt dangerous when she was doing what she was doing. Cassie, Barbara said. Just that. The particular warmth of someone who has been worried and is now hearing a voice releasing some of that worry without knowing exactly why. Hi Aunt Barb, are you all right? Yes? Cassie said. And then because it was true and because saying true things was becoming more available to her now that the space taken up by not saying was beginning to clear, I think I might be okay. Barbara talked for 45 minutes. About her garden. About a neighbor. About a terrible remodel the couple 2 doors down had undertaken and the months of construction sounds it had produced. About a book she'd read that Cassie had to read. She'd send it. Did Cassie still have the same address? Cassie said yes. She listened to her aunt talk about ordinary life and thought about how extraordinary ordinary sounded right now, how much she wanted. She drove to Tony's at 7. His apartment was above the bakery, a flight of stairs from the back of the shop, an arrangement that meant he had been approximately 12 seconds from fresh bread for 36 years. The apartment was small and warm and full of the accumulated presence of a life. Photographs, books with broken spines, a television on but muted, a smell of garlic and tomato that had started an hours before she arrived and had become the specific smell of the place. He made pasta. He really did make pasta from scratch. He had a hand-crank pasta machine that he produced from a cabinet, with the satisfaction of a man who uses the right tool for the right job, and has been doing so for decades. The dough had been resting when she arrived, wrapped in plastic on the counter. She sat at his kitchen table and watched him work. This was the first time she had sat in someone's kitchen and watched them cook without any portion of her attention being somewhere else. Without the monitoring and calculating and assessment of the room and its exits and its information. Without the weight of what she was building toward. Just sitting in a kitchen. Just watching someone make dinner. The simplicity of it was almost shocking. Tony rolled the dough and ran it through the machine, and hung the strips on a wooden rack he'd had for years. He moved with the efficiency of someone who has done this thousands of times. No excess motion. She thought. That's what training looks like when it becomes part of you. You're thinking about something, Tony said, not looking up. I'm thinking about how training becomes automatic. Everything becomes automatic if you do it long enough. He ran another sheet through. Your father could make coffee in the dark. Without thinking. I watched him do it once at 3 in the morning when we'd been talking all night and neither of us could see straight. He got up and made coffee by feel and never once looked at what he was doing. He hung the strip on the rack to chum such coffee in so many bad situations that his hands just knew. She sat with that. What did you two talk about all those late nights? Tony was quiet for a moment. Everything. The city, the people in it. Cases he was working on. He never told me details, but he'd talk about the shape of them, the moral weight of them, what it was like to know that certain things were happening and have limited ability to stop them. He paused. He talked about you constantly. The tournaments. How you moved. What he saw when he watched you compete. What did he see? Tony looked up. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He saw someone who understood that winning wasn't the point. That was the thing he kept coming back to. He set down the dough. He said most competitors he watched, even good ones, were fundamentally reacting, responding to what was coming at them. But you. He said you were always 2 steps ahead of the reaction. You were already in the next moment before the one finished. She thought about that. She thought about 14 months at La Stella. She thought about standing in Cataneo's study watching Ness calculate and knowing, before he finished calculating, where he was going to land. He taught me that without knowing he was teaching it, she said. The best lessons work that way. Tony went back to the pasta. You hungry? Starving actually. Good. 20 minutes. She sat still. The pasta took 22 minutes. It was extraordinary, she told him so. He waved it off in the Italian-American way that means I know but I appreciate you saying it. They ate and didn't talk about Richard Calder or the FBI or what was happening tonight in a 67-year-old man's life that he didn't know yet was happening. They talked about Barbara in Tucson and Northwestern University, and what it might mean to go to law school at 26 without any clear idea of what kind of lawyer you wanted to be, except one who did something that mattered. Criminal law, Tony said. That's what your father would say. I know, federal probably, given. He gestured vaguely, given everything. He poured more wine. She shook her head. She was driving. He poured it anyway. She drank half of it. They sat at the kitchen table in the apartment above the bakery, and the city moved outside and somewhere across that city, in a high-rise with a view of the strip, Richard Calder was either in his office or at dinner, Or doing whatever 67-year-old men with 30 years of carefully maintained power do on Thursday evenings, not knowing. Not yet. At 10:47 p.m., a message from Greer's. It's done, go home. She looked at Tony. He read her face. He said nothing. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for a moment. Just that. Then he took his hand back and picked up his wine. She drove home. She didn't turn on the news. Greer had told her not to. Not because anything would be on the news tonight. An arrest like this didn't immediately generate coverage. The machinery of federal prosecution didn't announce itself in real time. But because there was nothing the news could tell her that she didn't already know. She knew. She went home. Locked her door. Did the walkthrough. Everything where she'd left it. She went to the kitchen. Made tea, not coffee. It was too late for coffee. Sat at the cleared table and held the mug in both hands and let herself feel it. Not the victory of it. Not the satisfaction of strategy executed. Not any of the narrative frameworks people use to contain experiences like this one. To make them manageable, to give them a shape that fits in a sentence, just the fact of 4 years. Every choice she'd made. Every morning at 5 o'clock. Every shift at La Stella, every table cleared, every glass filled. Barone and Pruitt and Tony and Dex and Father Dennis and the letter and the key and the room on Boulder Highway that she hadn't gone to yet, that still had things in it she hadn't opened. Including a smaller envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting. The letter. She'd kept it until the work was done. Danny had always told her, don't open the dessert until you've finished your dinner. Not because you don't deserve it. Because if you eat it first, the dinner never gets finished. She looked at the clock and 10 p.m. She went to the bedroom, opened the closet, reached past the winter boots she'd brought from Colorado Springs, past the hanging garment bag, past the cardboard box that now contained only the photograph of Danny at Lake Mead and a stack of empty manila folders. She took out her jacket, put it on. She drove to Boulder Highway. The hotel was exactly as unremarkable as it had been when Tony first described it. A mid-range property. Clean, functional, completely invisible in the way of thousands of mid-range properties along thousands of American highways. The kind of place where people stop on the way to somewhere else and don't particularly remember stopping. Danny had chosen it deliberately. Invisible was what he needed. Room 412 was on the 4th floor. The elevator moved with the deliberate pace of something that had been doing this for decades and saw no reason to rush. The hallway was carpeted in a pattern designed to hide wear. The room numbers were brass. She stood at 412 for a moment. She took the key from around her neck. She'd worn it for 14 months every day. A small thing, brass lighter than you'd expect for something that had carried this much meaning. She put it in the lock. She opened the door. The room was ordinary, of course it was. A desk, a television, a window looking out onto the parking lot. Everything hotel standard, preserved by whatever minimal housekeeping arrangement Danny had established when he paid for 5 years in advance. The safe was in the closet, standard hotel safe, 4-digit code. She thought for a moment. She knew Dan's codes, had known them since she was a teenager, and he'd taught her his system. Not to be guessable but consistent enough to always remember. She tried the first combination. The safe opened. Inside, a manila envelope, thin. A small spiral notebook, pocket-sized. The kind Danny carried everywhere. A photograph she hid in the smaller envelope. Her name on it in his handwriting. She took everything out. Sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the new photograph first. Danny and a woman she didn't recognize. The body language of colleagues or old friends. The woman perhaps 50 in the photograph, professional looking, taken somewhere outdoors. On back in Danny's handwriting, LG 2019. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. Linda Greer. Danny had known Linda Greer. Of course he had. Because Danny Malone had been the kind of man who found the right people and built relationships with them carefully and put those relationships where they'd be needed when they were needed. He'd given Barone a phone number. He'd given Pruitt a note. He'd put a photograph of Linda Greer in a room on Boulder Highway that his daughter would open when the time was right. He'd connected them. Across 4 years and his own death, he'd connected them. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and she laughed. Surprising herself. The sound of it in the quiet room unfamiliar and good. Because it was funny actually, in the way that the most profound things are sometimes also funny. The way life folds in on itself and produces connections that look like coincidence until you see that they were never coincidence at all. Her father had known Linda Greer in 2019. Had put her photograph in a safe on Boulder Highway. Had trusted that the path would lead here. She'll know what to choose, knows what to do. She wiped her eyes. She set the photograph down. She picked up the envelope. Her name on the outside. In Danny's handwriting. She turned it over in her hands. She'd carried the knowledge of this envelope for 2 days without opening it. The letter she'd known was in room 412 since Tony first told her about this place. The one piece of her father she'd been saving until everything else was finished. Because if she opened it too early, if she read it while the work was still undone, she knew herself well enough to know what it would do. Not break her. She was past breaking. But change the quality of her concentration. Make it personal in a way that would have been operationally costly. It had always been personal, but the work needed to come first. Danny had taught her that too. Emotions are real. They're also data. Manage the data. Don't let it manage you. She had managed it. Now the work was done. She opened the envelope. 4 pages handwritten. The careful, precise handwriting she'd seen on the letter to Barone, on the note to Pruitt, on the back of the photograph. She read it. She will not say later to anyone what was in it, not to Tony, not to Pruitt, not to Greer. Some things are not for repetition. Some things are written for one person and belong to that person, and exist in that permanent, private country where a parent's love for a child lives, unchanged and unchangeable regardless of what happens to either of them. She read all 4 pages. She sat on the edge of the bed. She held the pages in her hands and she cried properly. For the first time in 4 years. Not the contained grief of someone who has decided grief is a resource to be managed. Not the deliberate compression she'd been performing since 2 a.m. in a hospital corridor. The real thing. The whole weight of it moving through her all at once. She cried for Danny. For the man who made pasta sauce on Sunday afternoons and drove her to tournaments and called her from his car afterward, hoarse from yelling. For the man who worked in impossible territory for 2 decades trying to make it less bad. For the man who had known, 2 weeks before he died, that he was building contingencies for a future he wouldn't see. For the man who had written 4 pages to his daughter and trusted that she would find them. She cried. The hotel room was quiet around her. The parking lot outside showed its ordinary light. Las Vegas, a few miles away, maintained its impossible brightness. She cried until she was finished. Then she folded the page she put in her jacket pocket. She sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. She breathed. She got up. She drove home at 1 in the morning, through the city, through the brightness, through the strip with its carnival energy and its total indifference to every specific human drama playing out within its orbit, past neighborhoods and hotels and construction sites. This city was always building, always adding, always becoming something slightly more than it was, which was maybe why Danny had loved it, for all its difficulty, for all the compromises it asked of everyone who lived there. She drove home. Parked in the lot, looked up at her building. The 3rd-floor windows of her apartment dark. She thought, I live here, not in the past 4 years. Not in the plan. Not in the weight of what needed to be done. She lived in that specific building. In that specific apartment. With the cleared kitchen table, and boots in the closet and the cardboard box that now held only a photograph and a stack of empty folders. I should get a plant. Danny's had always. The apartment on 4th Street had been full of them. Not decorative plants. Not staged. Actual plants he tended with the attention of a man who liked watching things grow and found it calming. She'd always meant to ask him how he kept them alive in a Vegas apartment. She'd missed her chance to ask. But she could probably figure it out. She got out of the car. She walked up to her apartment. She unlocked the door. She locked it behind her. She did not do the walkthrough. She stood in the hallway of her own apartment in the dark, and she did not check the rooms or the windows or the exits, because there was nothing to check for anymore, or at least not the same things. And the habit of checking was going to take a while to unlearn, and that was fine. Some fits take a while. She'd get there. She went to the kitchen. She picked up the photograph of Danny from the table. The Lake Mead photograph. The one she'd moved out of the box onto the table 3 nights ago, because it had felt like the right moment for it. She looked at it. He was squinting into the sun. He was smiling the real smile. She was beside him, 8 years old or so, looking up at him rather than at the camera. She carried the photograph to the living room, to the wall above the small bookcase, found a nail already there from whatever tenant had hung. She hung it. She stood back. She looked at it. Danny Malone, Lake Mead. The real smile. Okay, she said. To the empty apartment, to the photograph, to whatever portion of her father existed now in the particular permanent way that the dead exist for the people who love them. Okay, Dad. It's done. The arrest of Richard Calder was reported in the Las Vegas Review-Journal on Saturday morning. not front page. The federal machinery moves carefully, and carefully doesn't always mean quickly in terms of public visibility. A brief item in the business section. Arrest of a prominent Las Vegas financial figure on federal charges including racketeering. The name of the investigation not given, the charges not detailed. But the name was there. Richard Calder, 67 of Las Vegas. She read it at 6:45 a.m. She was eating She trained from 5 to 6:30. Made coffee. Made toast. Was eating breakfast like a person who ate breakfast, rather than someone running toward a 4-year goal at 3 miles an hour. She read the brief item twice. She finished her toast. Carl Ness was arrested the same morning. That didn't make the paper at all, not initially. Pruitt had texted her at 7 a.m. Carl's in custody. My part's done. Retirement party is Tuesday if you want to come. She'd written back, I'll be there. Andrew Reese, Calder's director of risk management, the man who had been in the room 4 years ago, was arrested on Friday evening. Apparently preparing to travel. Federal agents found him with 2 bags packed and a one-way ticket to Zurich. Some people, when they feel a net closing, run for Switzerland. The net was already closed. She texted Dex, it's in the news. His response came immediately, which meant he'd been awake waiting for it. I know. I set up a Google alert 4 months ago. Felt presumptuous but also like the right call. She smiled at her phone. She typed, thank you Dex, for all of it. A pause. Then he was a good man, your dad. He deserved better than what happened. I'm glad we could fix some of it. She set the phone down. She finished her coffee. She stood up from the kitchen table. She went to the window. She looked at the parking lot below, lit by the September morning sun, already warm, already moving toward the heat of the day. It would take time, the rest of it. The arraignments, the evidence review, the grand jury proceedings, the negotiation of cooperation agreements. The long unsexy procedural work of federal prosecution that would eventually, if everything held the way Greer believed it would hold, result in Richard Calder standing in front of a federal judge and hearing a sentence read to him. That was fine. She had time now. Vincent Catino entered the Federal Witness Protection Program on the following Monday. She didn't know this until Barone told her, a week later, in the parking lot of a coffee shop in the southwest of the city. Both of them having agreed, independently, that St. Michael's had served its purpose, and they were allowed to meet somewhere with better parking. Barone looked different. Less compressed, less contained. Like something that had been holding him in a particular shape, for a very long time had released its grip and his body was slowly remembering what it felt like to be its actual size. He went quietly, Barone said. He didn't ask for anything except that his son, the younger one in Boston, be left entirely out of it. Greer agreed. She told me. Barone nodded. He asked me to tell you some, he said. Before he left, she waited. He said your father was the conscience of an organization that didn't deserve one. He said he knew that. He said the only useful thing he ever did in the last 4 years was hold on long enough to be useful to you. Barone paused. He said Danny Malone would have found that ironic. A man spending 4 years keeping himself alive specifically so the daughter of the man he failed could use him. He looked at her. He said he hoped it counted for something. She stood in the parking lot in the morning sun. She thought about a 62-year-old man in a cardigan, pouring water with careful hands, looking at the face of someone he hadn't protected. She thought about what it costs people to do the right thing after years of doing the wrong thing, the specific difficult non-cinematic courage of it. Tell him it counts, she said. Barone nodded.
What will you do?
He said. Now that...
Law school?
She said. Northwestern. He looked at you were accepted. I applied. I haven't heard yet. She paused. But I was accepted. He looked at her the way people look at something that makes complete, obvious, after law. He said. Federal. Prosecution side. She looked at the sky. I want to understand how the system works from the inside, the right inside. A pause. Danny would say. I know what he'd say. She looked at Barone. He'd say the system is only as good as the people in it. And then he'd say, so get in it. Barone was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she had not seen him do in all the conversations they'd had across these weeks. He's not a large smile. Not the smile of a man who smiled easily, the rare smile of someone for whom the expression costs something. And means exactly that much. Get in it, he said. She went to the gym for the first time in 14 months. Not her bedroom, not the cleared space and the bare hardwood. An actual Taekwondo dojang in Henderson. Adult classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings. Run by a woman named Master Reeves, who had trained in Seoul for 12 years and had the quiet authority of someone who had been practicing long enough that the practice and the person were no longer separable. She walked in on a Tuesday evening. Looked at the way she stood. At the way she'd walked in from the parking lot. You've trained before. Not a question, yes. How long did you stop? 4 years. A pause. Why, I had something else I needed to do. Master Reeves studied her. Is it finished, the something else? Yes, another pause. Don't expect it to come back immediately. The body remembers. But memory is not the same as current strength. You'll have to rebuild some of it. Come back Saturday, I'll assess where you are. She came back. Saturday. Master Reeves watched her go through a full session. Watched the way she moved, the way she adjusted, the way she fell and got up. Because even at her level you fall sometimes. And the getting up is always the thing. Afterward, Master Reeves said, "You're better than you think you are." Which is exactly the right problem to have. Cassie thought about that. I was told something similar once, she said, about something else entirely. It's always true, Master Reeves said. Come on Tuesdays. Come on Saturdays. We'll see where you are in 6 months. She came on Tuesdays. She came on Saturdays. The Northwestern acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday. She was at Figs when she got the email notification. Sitting in the back room, drinking coffee Tony had made, reading something, not really thinking about anything, which was itself a new skill she was developing. The skill of being somewhere without it being a strategic position. She opened the email, she read it. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went to the front of the bakery where Tony was at the counter talking to a customer about the difference between ciabatta and focaccia, with the passionate specificity of a man who considers this a moral question. She waited until the customer left. She said, "I'm in." Tony looked at her. She showed him the email. He read it. He looked up. He looked at the photograph on the back wall. The fishing boat, lake meet, him and Danny, younger and squinting. He said, he knew. He knew what? That you'd get there, all of it. Tony put the phone down. He went to this display case. He took out Thal's large chalo on the shelf and he put it on a plate and he slid it across the counter to her. The real one, he said. Not the display. She ate it. It was perfect. The trial was scheduled to begin 10 months after Calder's arrest. She wasn't a party to it. She was a the first witness listed for the prosecution, in fact, which Greer had explained carefully as both an honor and a responsibility. The kind of witness who sets the table for everything that follows. Who shows the jury the shape of the thing before the evidence fills it in. She went through Northwestern's first semester the way she went through everything. Methodically, with complete attention. Learning the structure of the law the way she had once learned the structure of a fight. From the ground up, building on foundations until the foundations were themselves the thing rather than the scaffolding. She went to Taekwondo on Tuesdays and Saturdays. She called Aunt Barbara every week. She went to Figs on Sunday mornings because Tony opened at 7, and the bread was best before noon, and because the back room with the mismatched chairs and the ancient coffee maker and the photograph on the wall was the closest thing she had to a home that predated the 4 years. She carried the letter in the inner pocket of her jacket every day. She didn't read it again. She didn't need to. She'd memorized it, not deliberately, but the way you memorize things that matter without trying. The way certain words move from the page into permanent residence in your actual interior life. She carried it anyway, because carrying it was the right thing to do. The morning of the trial she got up at 5. She trained. She made coffee. She showered. She put on the dark navy suit she'd bought for this. Not expensive, exactly right. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked like a lawyer. She looked like a Malone. She looked like Danny. She drove to the federal courthouse downtown. Parked and walked the half-block to the entrance in the October morning that was beginning to cool towards something that felt like the season Las Vegas technically calls fall. Went through security. Found the prosecution team's waiting area and sat and reviewed her notes for 20 minutes. Not 20 minutes of memorizing. She knew everything she was going to say. 20 minutes of the stillness exercise, the clearing, the letting go of everything in the basin until there was only the present moment and the work. At 9 a.m. she walked into the courtroom. She sat in the witness box. She looked at the jury. 12 people. Several of them leaning forward slightly, the way people lean when they sense they're about to hear something that matters. She looked, briefly, at the defendant's table. Richard Calder, 67, still in a good suit. Still with the bearing of a man who has spent his life in rooms where he was the one who decided things. His expression, she read it the way Danny had taught her to read expressions, was the expression of a man who had assessed his options and concluded that this was manageable. He would discover, in the next several months, that he was wrong about that. She looked at Linda Greer at the prosecution table. Greer gave her a single nod. The judge said, Miss Malone, you've been sworn in when you're ready. And the prosecuting attorney said, Miss Malone, can you describe, in your own words, what happened on the night of October 3rd? She looked at the jury. She thought about Danny, the real smile. The fishing pole Lake Mead. The Sunday pastas and the tournaments and the phone calls from the car hoarse from yelling. She thought about a man who had known he was building toward an ending and had trusted his daughter to find the beginning. She said, I was carrying their drinks, a pause. And then I wasn't. They say the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's watching. They're right. But here's what they don't tell you about that person. They don't tell you what it costs to be invisible that long. What it takes to build a plan across 4 years and hold it and not break. What it feels like to walk into a room every day knowing more than anyone in it and choosing, deliberately, every single, not to show it yet. They don't tell you about the 5 o'clock mornings. About the cleared space in the bedroom and the work that nobody watched. About 14 years of building something that nobody knew about until the moment they needed to know about it. They don't tell you about the letter in the jacket pocket. About the photograph on the wall. About Sunday mornings in the back of a bread bakery with a man who loved your father like a brother and made cannoli he insisted were better than the display ones and was right. They don't tell you about all the people your father trusted, scattered carefully across a city like seeds, waiting for a daughter he knew would come looking. They tell you she was a waitress. They don't tell you she was already everything else. Danny Malone named his daughter Cassie, after his grandmother. He taught her to fall and get back up. He taught her that the person in the room nobody watches is the most dangerous person in it. He taught her without knowing he was teaching her. The way all the best lessons work. She sat in that witness box and looked at the jury and told the truth, all of it. Every piece of what she'd found and how she'd found it and what it meant. The trial lasted 4 months. Richard Calder was convicted on 17 counts. Carl Ness pled guilty as cooperation agreement. He received a reduced sentence. It was still substantial. Andrew Reese was extradited from Switzerland, where they had caught him briefly before the international warrant closed that door, and was convicted separately, 8 months after Calder. Linda Greer was promoted to special agent in charge of the Las Vegas Organized Crime Division. Ray Pruitt retired on schedule and moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where the altitude was better for his knees and where he told Cassie at his retirement party, a very pleasant relationship with a lake that was willing to give up a fish occasionally. Joseph Barone cooperated fully with the federal investigation, received a reduced sentence. He served it. He was 68 when he got out. He moved to a small town in New Mexico that no one had heard of and opened, according to Tony, a very small restaurant that served very good Italian food to a clientele of about 30 regular customers who never knew anything about who he had been. Tony Figg turned 64. His granddaughter's name, which he eventually learned to pronounce, was Isadora. Cassie graduated from Northwestern Law. She took a position as an assistant United States attorney in the federal prosecution office. She moved to Chicago. She took the photograph of Danny with her. She found an apartment. She cleared a space in the bedroom, and she trained from 5 to 6:30 every morning because that was who she was. That was the structure she'd built. And the structure was also the person. She got a plant too, actually. She called Tony every Sunday morning. From her kitchen, while the coffee brewed, she carried the letter. Always. Some things don't need a reason, some things you just carry. Because the weight of them is not a burden. It's a way of keeping something alive. It's a way of saying, I know where I came from, I know what it cost. And I know exactly what to do with it.